Chapter 1. The sun shone brightly across the afternoon sky. The rays passed through the white clouds, vibrating across the blue canvas above them. They glistered above the surface of the plastic decorations, making the red and golden decorations sparkle, much to Emily's glee. The balloons around the table swayed with the gentle breeze, dancing along to the rhythm of the songs blasting through the speakers. The high tune of the song wasn't the only sound booming around her. On the contrary, the sound of screaming and laughing kids was far louder than the song. The sounds around Kayla were a mix, making a gentle headache form at the back of her head. Kayla tried pushing the feeling away. The day was far too important to allow herself to be distracted by such pointless things. Her eyes followed the little nuggets around as they ran through the freshly cut grass, trying desperately to get away from the Disney princess she and Ryan had hired. As Emily ran, her hand holding firmly to her friend's hand, she threw a glance at her mother. Kayla chuckled, shaking her head in amusement. She was glad her daughter was having fun. Suddenly, the feeling of a hand being wrapped around her waist brought her out of her daydream. Her eyes suddenly diverted from the scene in front of her and moved to gaze behind her. She knew who it was even before her eyes met his. The smell of his cologne and the gentle touch of his hand gave him away. She had had over 5 years to get used to them, to learn and memorize them. Smiling, she turned around, her hands wrapping themselves around his neck as she smiled. "You are late," she stated, trying to look serious, her brows knitting together as she looked at him. "Traffic?" Ryan asked, raising a brow, an innocent smile playing on his lips. Kayla rolled her eyes and moved her head slightly to the left. "Really?" she asked, amusement mixed with disbelief playing in her hazel eyes. "From all the excuses you could have chosen, you decided to go along with this?" On any other day, she would have been mad. Kayla had made sure to make it clear to Ryan that family definitely came before work, not that she had needed to enforce it onto him much. Ryan was a great father and a wonderful husband. He tried to balance his personal and professional life as best as he could. But the day was different. He had just returned from a business trip in Germany after signing an important partnership. He deserved to be a bit late after all the work he had done. "Welcome back," she finally said, her lips pressing onto his for a slight second before pulling back. "I missed you." It was great having him back. 3 days away from him was simply too much. Throughout their entire relationship and marriage, they had rarely been apart, and so when it happened, Kayla could barely stand it. Ryan did not need to answer with words. The way he held her against his chest was enough to make her understand that he had been going crazy. He had barely found the strength inside to focus on work and not on the beautiful woman waiting for him. Ryan would have stayed there forever, having Kayla so close to him, with her sweet scent teasing his scenes, but he couldn't. He had a little nugget to greet. "Where is our birthday girl?" Ryan finally asked, pushing himself away from Kayla so he could look past her. He spotted Emily almost immediately. She was sprawled across the grass with the princess above her, tickling her, while all the other kids erupted in a fit of laughs and giggles. Her hair formed a halo around her head. She resembled Kayla so much, with the same long lashes and beautiful skin tone. Her eyes, on the other hand, were his. No one could deny that. It was only after he had laid eyes on his daughter that he actually realized that you could see the ocean in someone's eyes. "Go! She has been waiting for you," Kayla said, her hand gently pushing him towards Emily. Ryan did not hesitate. He immediately let go and half ran his way towards his daughter. Emily seemed to have noticed him instantly. Her hands reached towards the woman playing with her and pushed her away, her little legs immediately rising. She ran towards Ryan, her lips curled into a smile. Her hands were extended in front of her, ready to wrap themselves around Ryan. "Daddy!" she screamed as she threw herself into his arms. Holding Emily was like seeing her for the first time. Whenever he smelled her beautiful locks, or held her small body in his arms, he could relive the emotions he had felt exactly 5 years ago. The day she was born seemed to be only mere days ago, but according to the laws of time, years had passed. Ryan had tried to think about it several times, to actually wrap his mind around the idea that he had been a father and husband for that long, but the idea was simply beyond his comprehension. "Happy birthday, sweetheart!" His lips touched her forehead before he pulled slightly away so he could gaze at her. She was wearing a pink fluffy dress with butterflies decorating the lower half. She looked like a flower blooming in spring. Her smile was like the sunshine ready to melt the cold ice winter left behind. Thinking about it, she was spring itself. The spring of Kayla's and his life. She had come into their lives when they both needed it most, blessing them with more joy and happiness than they ever thought possible. "You want to see what I got you?" He knew asking was pointless. His daughter was as curious as her mother. It was almost impossible to mention a surprise without receiving 1,000 questions from them. "Yes." Her voice was loud, nearly echoing in the area around them. Ryan chuckled and rolled his eyes before lifting Emily in the air. "Mommy did a great job with the party, didn't she?" Ryan asked as they approached the car. Emily nodded. She didn't want to add the glitter, but Grandma made her do it. It was only then that Ryan noticed the large plastic pool filled with pink glitter. It was definitely too extravagant for Kayla. It must have been his mother that did it. It surely seemed like something she would come up on her own. No need for Emily to suggest it. "Here you go." Ryan huffed as he lowered her on the ground, his hand already reaching for his car keys. "Now, I'll need you to close your eyes." Her hands immediately flew to her eyes, her chubby fingers forming a curtain above them. Ryan tried hard not to chuckle, but she was being too adorable not to. The pink box in the back of his car was large, covering half the seats. It was glittery, with stripes in different shades of pink. He could see light inside his daughter's eyes, her blue pools widening as she spotted the doll inside the box. To Ryan, there was nothing special or magical about it. But to his daughter, the blonde doll on top of the pink pony was heaven. He could remember a time when he had been a child too, when simple toys such as that used to make his entire day. He would have wished to go back to those times, but that would mean going through the chaos his father had caused, and he did not wish to do that. He would trade the innocence of his childhood with the present he now lived any day. "Thank you, Daddy." He had been lost in his own thoughts for a bit. He had realized it only after Emily's voice brought him out of his daydream. He meant to say something, or probably engulf her in a hug again, but before he could do that, he heard footsteps behind them. "Look, Mommy, Daddy bought me a Maya doll. Show me!" Of course, Kayla had known about the gift long before it was bought. In fact, she had been the one to choose it. She and Ryan worked like that. He was bad with choosing gifts, in fact. He was bad with anything involving shopping, so Kayla made sure to help him when it came to such things. While Kayla tried to look surprised by the huge doll in the box, Ryan took his time to study the two girls in front of him. It had only been a few days, but he had missed them a lot. And seeing them in front of him, talking and laughing as they studied the gift, made his heart well. "Ryan!" It was his mother. Smiling, he turned his arms already extending to greet the woman. It didn't take him long to notice his mom was sporting a new hair color. This time around, she had gone on to try bright red short hair. He had to admit it. It was a change he was unsure of. But who was he to judge? "I see you have a new look," he joked, chuckling as he pulled away from the bear hug. "Do you like it?" Ryan could swear he heard Kayla muffle a laugh behind him. "It suits you." What else was he to say? He had gotten used to his mother's extravagant fashion. She was a high lady of the society and never failed to miss an opportunity to show it. "Come on now, it's time to serve the cake. The children's parents will be here soon." And once again, Kayla saved Ryan from his mother. Meredith was already eyeing him deadly, sensing his sarcasm when it came to her new look. Without hesitation, he moved to lift his daughter. "There you go!" Ryan kissed Meredith's cheek as he walked past her and towards the crowd of excited kids. "Your mom is already in the kitchen, dear." Meredith smiled before she rushed after her son. Soon, Kayla found herself walking through the crowd of kids, her hands holding firmly onto the pink platter. She could barely see in front of her. her entire vision being captured by the giant cake in her hands. The smell of the red frosting reached her nostrils, making her oddly crave it. She wasn't one to like strawberries, but as she carried the cake towards the table in the middle of the courtyard, she couldn't help but fantasize about a large piece of cake. Around her, there was a choir of voices singing out of sync. Kayla was afraid to lose focus and trip, but that did not prevent her from singing happy birthday to her only daughter. She had done it many times now, 4 to be exact, but this did not mean this time around was any less emotional. On the contrary, every time Kayla felt more overwhelmed. Every word she pronounced made her relive all those moments along her daughter. She remembered the day she gave birth to her, the day she held her in her hands, and all those other moments. Looking around, watching her mother, Ryan, and Meredith, she could tell they were doing the same thing. Indeed, it was a touching moment that brought tears to their eyes. Emily squealed as Kayla placed the strawberry-shaped cake on the table. She jumped from her father's grasp and beside the blond little boy in front of her. "Happy birthday, Em," the little boy said, right before he engulfed her in a hug. Kayla and the other adults around couldn't help but burst out in a fit of laughter. They were simply too adorable. "Come on, honey, make a wish," Tanya said, as she placed a hand behind her granddaughter's back. By the time the party ended, it was already night. The sun had settled a while ago, leaving room for the moon and the darkness accompanying it. It was quiet inside the house, something that did not often happen. But then again, none of them were surprised. They had had a long day and everyone was too exhausted. Ryan was happy to be back home. He lay next to his daughter in bed with a storybook between his fingers. He was reading the last line and was more than eager to end the night there. He had spent time with Emily, but he was now eager to spend some with his wife, too. He had missed her dearly and wanted to hold her after those nights away. "The end," he finally whispered, his eyes gazing at Kayla before looking back at Emily. She looked tired, but her little blue eyes were still wide and awake. "I want another story, Daddy," she said, her voice dripping with sleep. "No, honey, you should really sleep," Ryan said tenderly, his hand reaching for her cheek, brushing his thumb over her smooth skin before planting a kiss on her forehead. "A short one, please." She was playing dirty. She knew the effect her puppy eyes had on him, and she was using that to her advantage. "Which story do you want?" He sighed, a small smile creeping on the corner of his lips. "Tell me how you and Mommy met." Neither of them expected that. Emily had never showed much interest in that particular subject. But then again, they had to see it coming sometime. She was growing. Questions were surely forming in the back of her mind constantly. She was a curious kid, just like her parents. Kayla and Ryan found themselves looking at one another. She shrugged, unsure of what she should say. Kayla was more than grateful that Emily had caught Ryan by surprise. He was good at putting things together in an easy story, unlike her. She was a bad narrator and would have found herself caught in a maze without an end. Sighing, Ryan turned towards Emily again and smiled, gulping before he started. "Well, your mommy actually met Grandma first. Grandma was searching for a girl who could make your daddy happy, and when she saw your mommy, she knew she was perfect for him." The story was brief, but it was the best he could do. He and Kayla had met in a rather unfashionable manner. Their relationship had to go through several phases, and those phases could barely be explained to a kid. But Ryan had done a good job. He had managed to sum up the main aspect of their meeting. "I am glad Grandma met Mom," Emily said, her voice barely audible as she sank deeper into her blankets. Kayla smiled as she stood up, approaching the little bed. She lowered and kissed her cheek, before whispering another "happy birthday" in her ear. Ryan had already turned off the lights and was heading towards the door, his hand reaching for the tie that had been hanging loosely around his neck. Kayla slowly closed the door behind her before turning around, her eyes coming in contact with the blue pools she loved so much. Her hands wrapped around his neck, her smile pressing against his lips. The smell of his cologne was still strong, playing tricks on her senses, making her entire body burn. "Finally!" I can properly greet my wife, he whispered in between kisses. In those few minutes, they realized just how much they missed one another and how they wished they could stay like that forever. Chapter 2. Kayla could feel the warm touch of the sun rays on her face. They brushed against her closed eyelids in a cascade of light. On any other day, she would welcome the feeling. She loved the brightness of mornings and the scent of coffee. But this time around, everything was rejected by her body. Her head spun, the hammering sensation against her skull intensified if she dared remove the duvet from her eyes. Her stomach churned only at the mere thought of sipping the smallest drop of coffee. She had no idea where it was all coming from, but she blamed it on the tiredness she had been feeling for the last couple of days. She turned to lie on her back, hoping to ease the nausea resting in the pit of her stomach, but the move did nothing but aggravate the sensation. Groaning, she looked beside her, hoping to find Ryan there. She had missed smelling his cologne in the morning and to feel his arms around her as soon as she opened her eyes. Unfortunately, the sheets were cold, a sign that he had been long gone. Slowly, she tried to open her eyes, fighting past the heaviness resting above them. The movement seemed to do her more harm than good. As soon as her eyes came in contact with the brightness surrounding her, her entire stomach seemed to flip. The way to the bathroom was a blur to Kayla. All she could remember was suddenly standing over the toilet, throwing up everything she had eaten the day before. It had been so long since she had last felt nauseous, she had almost forgotten the feeling. Almost. By the time she was done, she had sat on the ground, leaning against the bathtub, her head slightly backwards. She was looking mindlessly at the cupboards beside the door, her mind a blank sheet of paper. She stayed there for a few minutes, thinking of nothing in particular. That was until she finally noticed the pink box on the top shelf. There wasn't anything unusual to it. She had seen it 1,000 times every month, but still, that did not mean its presence did not hit her like a cold bucket of ice. How could she be this dumb? How come she did not notice it before? It had been so obvious. The signs had been all there, yet she had ignored them with such passion. She no longer felt the pain and churning feeling in the pit of her stomach. She was suddenly numb, overwhelmed by a feeling of excitement she hadn't felt in a while. Her mind was swirling in 1,000 directions, already planning, already wondering. She had done this before, but it had been planned. It had been so different. The emotions she then felt were those of excitement and love, but this time around it was different. Those emotions were mixed with surprise, with dread and shock. Her hand, involuntary, moved to rest over her belly, her thumb gently stroking the bare skin beneath her slightly raised shirt. Her skin was warm, the effect of the duvet still lingering above it. She smiled as she thought about the possibility of being pregnant. She had thought about it many times after Emily's birth, but she and Ryan never actually planned it. They silently decided to leave a potential new pregnancy to fate. Suddenly, there was a knock to the bathroom door. Apparently, she had closed it on her way in. She knew who it was without asking. Taking in a deep breath, she tried to collect herself before parting her lips to answer. "I'll be out in a minute." She thanked the heavens that her voice did not tremble. In fact, she had managed to mask her emotions rather well. "Okay, breakfast is ready. Thought you would like to know." Kayla exhaled in relief, her ears following the sound of his footsteps until they disappeared. Slowly, she then stood up, her hand holding onto the sink. The cool marble pressed against her palm as she came to meet her reflection. She looked a bit tired, but it might have been because she just threw up. Taking in a deep breath, she splashed some water onto her face, her warm skin welcoming the chill feeling. It awakened her, washing away any other feeling the morning sickness brought to surface. She was now only excited, simply thinking about nothing else but the possibility of a pregnancy. That morning, she did not bother to change into anything too fancy. She felt a bit too tired for that. So, instead, she opted for some jeans and a white shirt that showed a thin outline of the gray bra she wore underneath. She brushed her brown hair away from her face, wrapping it in a messy bun. She should have done something fancier for the day, given that her husband had just returned from abroad, but she knew Ryan was not the kind of man to judge. He loved her for who she was, not what she wore around. Downstairs, Ryan was struggling with a pancake pan. His mother and Tanya were away for the weekend. Apparently, his mother talked Tanya into going with her to a resort for a few days. Not that Ryan was campaigning. He loved living with the two women, but he much appreciated spending some time with his wife and daughter. He looked at Emily from beneath his lashes, catching a glimpse of her as she smiled down at the little coloring book in hand. She seemed to be enjoying the different images in there. The crayons were scattered all over the counter, taking up most of the place. But he did not mind. He enjoyed seeing her so focused. In fact, Emily reminded him so much of Kayla. They had the same facial expressions sometimes. For instance, whenever both girls thought, they wrinkled their noses and poked their tongues outside. "What's so funny, little lady? The cat in here looks like you." She chuckled, pointing at the image with her little finger. "Can I see?" It was Kayla who spoke this time around. She had just entered through the kitchen double doors, her hand resting inside the two pockets of her cardigan. She looked beautiful, with her natural beauty glowing even in the early hours of the day. Ryan could see her 1,000 times, but he never actually got used to the idea that he actually won the woman's heart. Okay, she is kind of right. Ryan narrowed his eyes and tried to look at the two girls with a threatening glare, although he knew he was failing miserably. His lips twitched at the corners as a smile fought its way to the surface. Look. It was a picture of an angry cat. It was a tall and lean cat, standing on 2 feet with a pair of glasses on its head. It was angry, with its brows knitted above the uncolored eyes. They were right, though. The cat surely looked like him. "You girls lost all your rights to these pancakes," he finally said, his body turning around dramatically as his hands reached for the 2 plates he had placed by the honey jar. The next thing Ryan knew was that there were 2 pairs of hands on his waist. The fingers moved across the surface of his thin gray shirt. He was ticklish, and both girls knew it. The laughs rolled off of his lips involuntarily as he fought hard to keep his balance. His head was dizzy as his body twitched to get away from the ticklish gestures of his wife and daughter. He couldn't focus on much, but he could surely hear the giggles above him, growing louder as he collapsed on the kitchen floor. The fits of laughs mixed with the sounds coming through the opened window. Okay, you guys win!" he finally managed to shout. He was panting, barely able to breathe anymore. He hadn't laughed that much in ages. By the time he recovered, Kayla and Emily were already sitting on the stools digging into the breakfast he had cooked. Initially, he wasn't as hungry as he thought he would be, but the way the girls enjoyed them made him crave some of his own. Sighing, he grabbed a plate and sat beside Kayla, planting a kiss on her cheek before sitting down. Kayla smiled but said nothing, too indulged in the mix of flavors in her mouth. He knew his wife was one to enjoy food, but he had to admit, the look on her face was surely more than the usual. She must have been hungry. That was the only explanation he found. "So, I was thinking, how about you and I go for a ride today?" he asked, looking at Emily from beneath his lashes. "What about me?" Kayla asked, her brow raising as she looked at the two. "I have something else planned for you." Kayla was hooked now. "What is it?" "It's a surprise. Now come on. Eat up." He knew how much Kayla hated surprises. She hated to wait, to have to wonder what he was planning. But the more she hated it, the more he enjoyed it. It meant that even after all those years, he still didn't lose his touch. He was still able to please and entertain his wife. Kayla did not press him into telling her, nor did she insist on joining their ride, but he was not surprised about it. She was the kind of mother to encourage a healthy bond between her child and her father. She loved it when they spent quality time together. While Ryan and Emily went on to talk about their ride, Kayla enjoyed her breakfast. She tried to focus on her meal, to reflect the ecstasy caused by the mix of flavors exploding in her mouth. She tried to do it so she would mask the thoughts rushing through her mind. She couldn't tell anyone about the potential pregnancy. At least, not until she did the test. "Are you okay?" Ryan whispered from beside her. She had been so caught in her thoughts that she failed to notice Emily's absence. It seemed that time had passed by her without much of a warning. Everyone, including her, had finished their meals. "Yeah, I am just a bit tired," she smiled, her lips curling before they pressed themselves against his cheek. "Take the day and rest then," he smiled. Kayla wished she could tell him about the potential pregnancy. She wished she could know for sure even without the test. But she couldn't. She couldn't excite Ryan only to have a negative result in the end. She didn't say much. Instead, she leaned in to kiss him. She wished they could spend the morning in bed together or cuddled on the couch watching some princess movie Emily would force them to see. But she didn't mind them spending time together either. She missed her father a lot and did not want Emily to even come close to feeling that. She loved the way her daughter was not deprived of a fatherly love. She remembered a time when Ryan would worry if he would be a good father. He had feared repeating his dad's mistakes, of disappointing his child the way his father disappointed him. How she wished she could go back in time to tell him he had nothing to worry about. Pulling back, she looked into his eyes, her hand resting on his cheek, feeling the warmth radiating over his skin. "How about I prepare a nice dinner for when you return? We could have a nice dinner date for 3. She chuckled, her eyes slightly gazing towards the door through which Emily had disappeared minutes ago. "Wonderful idea," he whispered, his lips falling onto hers once again. This time, however, they did not settle on her lips. They moved to kiss the crook of her neck. His breath and quick brush of his lips tickled her, making her explode in a fit of giggles. "Stop! Emily will see us," she managed to say in between giggles. "Let her see how much I love her, Mom." He planted one more kiss on her cheek before pulling away, his eyes scanning her with a fire she only saw when they were alone. "Come on, go! You have to get ready. I will go dress Emily." She knew neither of them wanted to leave the table, but they had priorities. Kayla looked around the kitchen, her eyes searching for the salt. She knew she had used it minutes ago, and apparently she had misplaced it. She didn't blame herself for the lack of attention, though. Her mind was a tornado, 1,000 ideas rushing through it. She tried to banish the ideas, the images, but whenever she blinked, she found herself seeing the images of the test she had done at the back of her mind. Sighing, she ran a hand through her hair right before she spotted the little white container behind a box of pasta. The kitchen was a mess, she had only noticed it. With peeled tomatoes and fallen leaves of mint in the far end, right beside the bowl in which she had initially stored the vegetables for the sauce. Dirty spoons and stained plates accompanied the used napkins and thrown towels on the table next to the door. It had been a while since she cooked, and it couldn't be more obvious. Her rather small cooking skills had become minuscule. They could barely be noticed. Thank God, Ryan and their mothers were there to make up for her lack of experience. She didn't know what she would do if she had to cook pasta for the rest of her life. "There you are," she muttered under her breath before letting go of the pan in hand. She half-danced her way to the counter, her legs following the tune of the song playing in the background. She was tense indeed. She was anxious, but happy enough to still dance. No matter how much time passed or how tired she came to be, she would always find the energy to dance. Whenever she cooked, she would always remember the first decent conversation she and Ryan had. The moment was now years behind, set aside along with other memories they had gathered along the years. She wondered if he ever remembered the day she made those sandwiches, when they first started talking, when they first started to actually see what there was past their facades and cold walls. Smiling, she approached the boiling pan of sauce once again, grains of salt sipping through her fingers and into the flavored liquid. While her eyes still lingered over the food, her other hand reached for the wooden spoon to her left. Everything smelled great. She could only hope it tasted the same. Carefully, she sipped from the spoon, trying hard not to burn her tongue in the process. At first, she couldn't get a hold of the flavors. Her brain mainly focused on the heat emitted. But when she did focus on them, she was more than pleased. Everything was exactly as she had hoped. The smell and taste of oregano dominated, just the way Ryan and Emily liked it. Just as she was about to turn off the fire beneath the pot, she heard the familiar shutting of the door. Hearing it past the music and different sounds around her was a miracle. In fact, she had been so surprised that she came to believe she had been subconsciously looking for it. Slowly, she wiped her hand with a white kitchen towel and rested her back against the counter, her eyes now turning to face the door. Her little daughter rushed through it minutes later, her arms wide open and hair disheveled. She ran towards her as if they hadn't seen each other in days. "Hey, sweetheart," Kayla whispered, her knees bending beneath her as she tried to lower herself at her daughter's level. Her fingers brushed through the loose curls around Emily's face as their eyes met. "How was your ride?" "We had so much fun. Daddy bought me cotton candy." Ryan entered that same exact second, a pink sweater hanging over his arm. Kayla smiled and stood up, her hand still holding onto Emily's, but her neck extended so she could kiss her husband. "You cooked?" Ryan asked, his brows arching as his eyes scanned the kitchen. The funny thing, however, wasn't Ryan's shocked expression, but her daughter's. It seemed that even at a young age you could tell when someone was bad at something. "You guys," Kayla complained, trying to look annoyed but failing miserably. She slapped Ryan across the arm playfully, while her other hand ruffled Emily's hair. "Stop judging and just go change. Dinner is almost ready." She ushered them away. Partially, she wanted to have dinner, to finish with it so she could finally talk to Ryan about the test. She had stashed it somewhere in her closet, underneath a pair of jeans. Her heart immediately started racing only by thinking about it. She hadn't thought about it much. She had refused to allow her mind to wander around that specific subject. That would have only stressed her more. Suddenly, a wave of dizziness washed over her. Her head swayed, while her vision blurred. Her hands caught the handle of the door as she tried to sustain her weight. The feeling only lasted a couple of seconds, but it was enough to scare her. That had not been the first time it happened, and she did not know if it was healthy to blame it on the pregnancy or not. But that was something to worry about on another day. Chapter 3. Kayla stared in the round mirror of her bathroom, her eyes emptily looking in the hazel orbs staring back at her. Her fingers were a bit shaky. The anxiety rushed through her bloodstream. Ryan was still reading Emily a bedtime story, but Kayla expected him anytime soon. He had been away for a good half an hour, and usually their daughter didn't take longer to fall asleep, especially after such a long day. She still didn't know how she should tell him. She had first intended to make something romantic, but that would mean waiting longer until she could share the news. And she certainly could not do that. She already felt as if she was going to burst at any moment now. Sighing, she gave up on any thought. No matter how much she thought about the right words, or no matter how she thought about the manner in which she should tell him, she knew she would end up doing something completely different. That is, if she even managed to say anything, she was already wondering if the hormones would just get the best of her and would just make her collapse in a fit of laughter and tears. From the corner of her eye, she could see the pink pregnancy test she had settled on the counter. The 2 lines were still bold, the brilliant red pigment almost blinding her. Her fingers reached for it, grabbing the sides gently, as if afraid that it would disappear. Holding it so gently was almost a mistake. The test was just about to drop and smash against the marble floor of the bathroom the second she heard the door of her bedroom open. The time had come. She wasn't nervous of what he would think or how he would react. She knew Ryan well enough by now to know that he would be as thrilled as her. But that did not make it easier. The entire subject was so fragile, so amazing, yet so scary. Indeed, she had been pregnant before. She had another child. But this entire thing was new, different. And it scared her. Maybe she was overreacting. In fact, she knew she was. But she blamed it on the hormones and mixed feelings. Aside from that, she hoped that once Ryan knew too, she would be able to sort all those thoughts out and just focus on the joy of having another child. Taking in a deep breath, she moved to face the door, her other hand brushing over the pink silk pajamas she had slipped into. A smile crept onto her lips as she placed the test in the small back pocket of her pajama bottoms. On the other side of the door, Ryan was taking off his shirt, throwing it lazily across the floor. Kayla could read how happy he was to be back in his bedroom. Exhaustion was written all over his face. She did not blame him. Their daughter was quite a handful. She had so much energy to give, and there was no way a grown-up could keep up with her. "It took me 2 stories to get her to sleep," Ryan said, a tired laugh playing on his lips. "How does she do it?" he asked, turning to look at Kayla as he frowned. "Well, I guess kids are just energetic," she shrugged. "Or she just resembles her mom," Ryan whispered, as he engulfed her in a tight embrace, his lips coming in contact with the side of her left cheek, right next to her earlobe. Kayla smiled, but said nothing in return. Instead, her hands rested on his chest, slowly pushing him away so she could gaze into his eyes. He immediately knew something was wrong. His eyebrows came to meet in a deep frown, his lips pouting as he shook his head. He brushed his thumb over her face, his hand moving to slide over the braid resting on one shoulder. He did not need to mutter the words. His eyes were already silently asking her what was wrong. His eyes searched hers, the blue orbs mixing with the hazel pools before him. "I've been trying to find the right words to bring this topic up. I've been meaning to make a sentimental speech, maybe bring up our past. But..." Her words were all over the place. She knew she was making no sense, and that she was confusing him even more. She could even feel a couple of tears pricking her eyes, blurring her vision a bit. She smiled and sniffed as she reached for the test, her fingers fidgeting with the edges. Ryan was silent, his eyes following her moves. He had no clue what Kayla was trying to tell him, and her crying only made more adrenaline pump through his blood. Eventually, he noticed the little plastic test in her hands, but it took him a couple of seconds to realize what it was. "Is this?" Ryan's hands trembled as he reached for the test, his entire body burning. He looked at Kayla through his lashes, afraid to even utter the words, too scared that it would all turn out to be a mere dream. Kayla laughed, tears rushing down her cheeks as she nodded. "I took the test this morning. I guess we are going to have another baby." The colors and everything around Ryan vanished. He was on cloud 9. Everything around him was so much brighter. There was nothing but light around him, as if he was suddenly closer to the sun. His hands reached for her waist, twirling her around as a loud laugh vibrated through his chest. He kissed her cheeks, and eyes, and nose. He kissed her head and hands. She had once again managed to make him the happiest man alive. "Am I really going to be a dad once again?" he asked. Kayla laughed and nodded, brushing the moisture off of her cheeks. Before that moment, her pregnancy had been surreal. Her body and mind had failed to acknowledge it at its full intensity. But now, having Ryan there with her, sharing the news and knowledge of the little angel inside her made everything feel so real. Ryan's lips brushed against hers. The kiss was tender and slow, despite the fact that he was bursting with happiness inside. "Emily is going to be thrilled," Ryan whispered against her lips. He lowered his gaze to Kayla's still flat tummy. His hands trailed down her arms and to the hem of her shirt, lifting it a bit so he could reveal her soft skin. He kneeled down in front of her, his lips curling once again. "Hello there, little one," he whispered, his lips brushing against the warm surface of her skin. "Welcome to the family." Suddenly, Kayla's vision blurred. Her entire body suddenly felt worn out and heavy. Her feet were about to buckle under her own weight, had it not been for Ryan's shoulders that were there for her support. She gulped and closed her eyes, trying to stop the room from spinning. Ryan was on his feet immediately, his hands wrapping around her waist, trying to keep her from falling. "I'm fine," she eventually said, her hands reaching for the bedside, seeking support. She did not look at Ryan as she sat down. Her entire body was still trembling and trying to regain full control. "Are you sure?" Ryan asked, his brows afurrowed. "Yeah, my body is just getting used to this little nugget." She smiled, trying to shrug the little incident off, although deep inside she could feel there was something else to it. Meredith and Tanya sat around the table going on and on about their little trip. You could see their excitement in their eyes. They had had the time of their lives, and on any other day, Kayla and Ryan would have been more than happy to focus on their story. They weren't the kind to just zone out or black out the people around them, especially their family. But they were guilty of that this time around. The sound of their mothers were an echo in the back of their heads, their voices mere murmurs. They were both lost in their own world, in worlds created by the same thought. They had to share the biggest news of the year. They were worried of how they should approach the subject. They had to do it in a delicate way. Their daughter was young, and they didn't want to scare her off. The sound of Emily's giggle interrupted their trail of thoughts, making both Ryan and Kayla jump back to reality. Kayla smiled, trying to seem as if she knew what was going on, when in fact, she had no idea what was so funny. Taking in a deep breath, she looked at Ryan and nodded. They needed to tell them. She couldn't keep silent anymore. The excitement was making her head light, lighter than it had been that morning. In fact, she felt so bizarre that she feared she would faint any moment now. "Are you guys okay?" Meredith finally asked, clearly noticing the small exchange of looks between the two. At the question, Kayla felt as if she was choking. The oxygen in the air was suddenly too little. She needed more air. She could feel her heart beating faster, each heartbeat matching the one in her belly. Her hand unconsciously went to touch that little portion above her belly button, her thumb tracing the imaginary curve, while her lips curled in a smile, while she waited for Ryan to make the first move. "In fact, Kayla and I wanted to talk to you about something." Kayla could sense the tension in his voice. He was nervous too, or maybe just bad at hiding happiness. Whatever it was, everyone could tell there was something important that needed to be shared. "Well, go on." Tanya motioned with her hand, urging him to carry on. "How about we speak about it there?" he asked, pointing to the couches a few feet away from the dining table. He needed a more personal space to talk about their little bundle of joy. Tanya and Meredith exchanged a look and shrugged. They clearly had no clue what was going on. Both women moved to sit on the white couches, while Emily remained at the table, sipping from her glass of orange juice. She was a good kid. She never interfered in grown-up talk, and she had no intention of doing so now. "You too, little nugget." Ryan picked her up, his left hand wrapping itself around her back, supporting Emily against his hip. "Seriously, guys, what is going on? We are a little freaked out," Meredith finally asked, her hand running through her red hair. "Just a little," Tanya motioned with her fingers. Ryan and Emily sat on the armchair while Kayla followed their move and sat on the side of the couch. Her hand rested on Ryan's shoulders, her hand squeezing a bit. She was unsure of who would start the conversation. They had failed to make a plan for the big reveal, but judging by the silence coming from her husband, she knew this was a clear sign she had to go first. "Would you tell us what is going on already?" "Meredith is right, we are worried." Kayla looked at Ryan and smiled, a soft laugh rolling off of her lips, matching the tone of Ryan's own chuckle. Tanya shook her head and stood up, sighing as she looked at her daughter. Emily is going to have a little brother or sister. There was no point in giving a long speech. The words she had just uttered were strong enough. They were simple enough for Emily to understand and strong enough to make both women burst out in a fit of happy tears. The two ladies jumped to their feet. Their screams could be surely heard by their neighbors. They were jumping and hugging one another, doing something that could resemble a happy dance. Emily was smiling, her little mind trying to wrap around the thought of having a sibling. Kayla crouched by her daughter, her hands wrapping around Emily's. "Are you excited, Princess?" Kayla asked, her breath catching in her throat. Truth be told, she could sense the happiness radiating off of the little girl, but still, she needed a reassurance. She needed to hear Emily say the words. Emily had been an only child for 5 years. She didn't want her to feel as if a sibling would steal the attention and love directed towards her. Her little lips parted, creating a toothy grin. Emily nodded and shouted, "Yes!" "Congratulations, darling," Kayla's mother said as she approached her. She could see tears in Tanya's eyes, making everything even more emotional. Seeing everyone get so excited made Kayla remember the old times. When she first got the results for Emily's test, she didn't think she was going to mother the child. She was deprived of feeling the happiness she was feeling now. But she never regretted it. Things were meant to happen in certain ways. The way everything happened made her appreciate what she had even more. And she knew Ryan felt the same. "We need cake," Meredith finally said, after she congratulated both Ryan and her. "Emily, you want to come help Grandma buy one?" Emily was out of Ryan's grasp in a second. "Yay, cake!" Emily shouted, already running to grab her red shoes. "We will be back in a few minutes." Kayla didn't doubt that. The cake shop was down the street. It was nothing fancy, but it made the best sweets in the entire city. Kayla nodded and smiled as she watched Meredith and Emily rush out the door and towards the car parked in front of the house. She was so happy, somewhere on cloud 9. The fact that everyone now knew only made everything more magical. "How long have you two known?" Kayla's mother asked, looking between Ryan and her with a questioning look. "I found out last night. She found out that same morning," Ryan said excitedly. Kayla knew that some people kept such things secret for a few days, even a few months. It had something to do with a superstition related to the health of the baby. But Kayla knew she could never do such a thing. She was never one to be good with keeping things to herself, let alone keep a pregnancy secret. "Good. I would have killed you guys if you would have kept this a secret. By the way, did you book an appointment to the doctor?" Ryan was the one to answer the question. Kayla could remember that detail clearly, but she could never remember what his exact response had been. That had been partially because as soon as Ryan started talking, her ears started buzzing. Her head was lighter, her entire body seemed to be drifting, floating on a cloud she couldn't even feel. She meant to tell her mom, to tell Ryan, but she didn't get to. Her body collapsed before she could get a hold of any of them, before she could even bring herself to formulate a sentence. Darkness consumed her blurry vision before she got to feel the impact of her body with the cold floor. Chapter 4. Bright Light. That was the first thing that popped into her mind. She thought, or rather acknowledged, that way before she even opened her eyes. She could see the shadows of the bright rays playing on the surface of her closed eyelids. Her mind was foggy, a mess of clouds and darkness. She tried to recall her last memory, to remember when she had fallen asleep, or rather where, but she couldn't. Her head hurt only by thinking about it. Kayla associated the feeling with a hangover. The symptoms were so similar: loss of memory, muscle ache, and headache. But that couldn't be the case. She knew she would never drink while pregnant. Pregnant. That was the thought that pulled her back to reality. It was like a wake-up call, a memory that was too strong to be forgotten by her body, no matter how worn out her brain was. Her eyes immediately opened, moving in sync with her hands that went to rest on her, still flat, belly. There was white and silver everywhere. The metallic handles and bars of the different machines were in contrast with the white sheets and coats around her. She could hear voices coming from beside her, too. She recognized them clearly. They matched the exact two voices she had heard before she fell into the darkness that had lured her in. Ryan? Her lips moved on their own, curling to form the only word her body seemed to know in such a crisis. The murmurs that had been going on around her suddenly stopped. The room got silent. The three voices seemed to stop in sync, along with the sound of sniffing and heavy breathing. "Kayla?" She had never heard her voice being uttered with such relief or happiness. The emotions, however, dripped from Ryan's voice. He was by her side in seconds, his hand grabbing hers, while the other moved to cup her face. She could swear she saw tears in his eyes, a kind of moisture Kayla had never witnessed. Worry was written all over his face, and he had every right to be. She could only imagine the terrifying thoughts that had run through his mind up to the point when they arrived at the hospital. However, while everyone else was worried about her, she was worrying about the baby. She could take any injury or any harm, but she could never survive knowing that her baby was hurt. Call it mother instinct or unconditional love. She did not know. It did not matter either. All she needed to understand and acknowledge was that she would give up her life for any child of hers, even one she was yet to hold. "The baby?" she whispered, her hand slipping from his as it came to rest once again over her belly. "The baby is fine. You, on the other hand, Gave us a good scare, Ryan said. Oh, stop talking, I'm fine. I told you it's my body adjusting to the pregnancy. Right, doctor? Kayla looked past Ryan and towards the man behind her mother. He was old, with white hair and a crooked nose. The white coat hugged his figure, clinging to the curve of his stomach. Well, I was just telling your husband that we are unsure. Your lab results just came in, and certain levels made us skeptical. While the theory of the pregnancy might just be right, we would like to perform an MRI scan, just to be sure. Performing the procedure did not mean anything, but the mere thought of it made a chill run down her spine. There was something about it that made Kayla shiver. It felt like a bad omen. Her gut did not accept it at all. And yet, what could she say to disagree with the doctor? He knew best. She needed to make sure she was safe and healthy, if not for her, then for her still unborn child. The doctor is right, honey. We should make sure everything is all right. Ryan told me you almost fainted yesterday, too. If only they knew. She had been feeling dizzy for weeks now. The exhaustion that had settled over her body seemed to be impossible to get rid of. She wasn't going to tell them that, though. That would only scare them more, and that was certainly not fair to them. Kayla could read the fear and worry on their faces. She needed to be strong for them. She needed to show them that everything was fine, or in fact, more than fine. Okay, but first, where is Emily? She prayed to God that her mother and Ryan had been smart enough not to scare the little girl. Meredith told her we had to attend an important business meeting. Don't worry about that. Focus on you for now. Kayla sighed and sank deeper into the white sheets of the uncomfortable hospital bed. She closed her eyes for a second and allowed herself a moment to think. It was funny how life kept putting her in the oddest of situations. A few hours ago, she was on cloud 9, revealing the happy news of her pregnancy. And now, just like that, she was lying in a hospital bed, hoping that the results of her tests would be clear. Mom, how about you go home? Assure Meredith that I am okay. Ryan is here with me anyway. In fact, Kayla wished to have as much privacy as possible. She hated hospitals. That little fact hadn't changed over the years. To her, those buildings still represented the dark shadows of death and pain. All she needed was Ryan by her side. His presence was the only antidote to all her fears and worries. He always had been. Kayla is right. We will call you as soon as we get the results. He seemed to understand her unspoken words, but it wasn't unusual. They were like that. They didn't only complete one another, they also understood the other half, as if it was themselves. Tanya clearly wanted to protest. She had parted her lips and took in a deep breath. But Kayla looked her in the eyes seriously, speaking silently, asking her mother to listen to her just this once. Tanya's shoulders sank as she sighed. She slightly nodded and looked towards the doctor, before grabbing the bag that had been resting on the black iron chair in the corner of the room. Okay, but call me as soon as you get those results, okay? She was dead serious, her eyes boring into Ryan's, daring him not to listen to her. Tanya was as intimidating as her daughter. Their hazel gazes could make Ryan agree to almost anything. But then again, maybe it wasn't the fact that they were intimidating. Maybe it was just the fact that they were his family. He cared about them and their well-being, maybe even more than he did about himself. Don't worry, I will. Just as he finished his sentence, the front door of the room opened. The brunette nurse who had been in earlier peeked her head inside, her eyes gazing past them and towards the doctor who was silently watching. Dr. Mike, we are clear for the scan. Okay, thank you, Sarah. I will go make sure everything is all right there. Sarah will speak to you and bring you to the room. That was where Kayla lost track of time. She could never recall the moment her mother left, or if she said goodbye at all. Having the nurse help her change in a blue hospital gown made Kayla relieve moments she never wanted to remember ever again. She could picture her mother all those years ago, back when her life was hanging by a thread. The image of the past and that of the present was oddly familiar, only changing their star. She would have been lying to herself if she didn't admit how scared she was. She had seen what a sick person went through. She had seen the hardships and pain of diseases. She feared them so badly. She couldn't remember the last time she had been admitted to the hospital. In fact, she doubted she had ever set foot in one, except for time when she gave birth to her daughter. Shaking her head, she tried to banish all those negative thoughts. There was no need to be so dramatic. She was simply doing some tests. It wasn't as if she was dying, right? She hoped not. Kayla felt Ryan's hand on her back, his thumb tracing circles up and down her spine. He knew that gesture relaxed her. Her body seemed to respond to it in the worst of situations. Sighing, she looked at Ryan from beneath her lashes, her hand coming on top of his as she smiled. She was going to be strong. She was more than sure nothing could go wrong. Looking at the doctor as he interpreted the results felt like an eternity. Her entire body was trembling, her sweaty palms becoming numb as she pressed her nails deeper into her palm. She tried to use the pain as a distraction, something to keep her attention away from the emotionless face of the doctor. Ryan was beside her, his foot tapping against the marble floor again and again. The sound was a murmur at the back of her head, a mere noise caught in the hurricane of thoughts that seemed to wreck her entire being from core. The images found on the screen in front of them were incomprehensible to both Ryan and Kayla. Neither of them had even the vaguest idea or knowledge of the black reflections the scan had revealed. They knew they were sections of her brain, shadows casted by the rays. During those few minutes, Kayla seemed to notice every fiber in the doctor's face, the way his brows moved whenever he nodded his head, or the way his jaw tensed as he looked closer at a certain point on the computer. Finally, his back slumped against the back of the black desk chair right before he turned to them, his fingers massaging the bridge of his nose. He opened his mouth as if to say something right before closing it again, a fact that only made Kayla even more anxious. She felt as if she was at the bridge of crying. She couldn't take the tension anymore. It was strangling her, taking away every bit of energy that was still left in her fragile petite body. "Doctor, please, could you just tell us what's wrong?" She really hoped, though, that nothing was wrong. She wished that the doctor would just dismiss them both, wishing them good luck. But by the look on his face, Kayla knew by now that that option was out the window. "Mrs. Kayla, please. Kayla, I don't know how to put this, but unfortunately, you have a brain tumor. Judging by its size, it hasn't been there long, so chemotherapy may help. But we would have to get to it right away. Otherwise it may advance and your state may become critical." Kayla gasped. It was as if someone had suddenly dropped a heavy weight over her chest. She couldn't breathe anymore. The room was getting smaller and smaller. Her ears were buzzing, the sound of the doctor being nothing but a mere whisper trying to fight its way through the walls that suddenly arose in the back of her mind. A tumor, chemotherapy, critical. They were the only words that passed through the filter that suddenly found residence inside her brain. She felt something moist run down her cheek, but she didn't bother to wipe it. Her hands were too numb to answer to such commands. Chemotherapy, but that would mean... It was Ryan who spoke that time around. She thanked the lucky stars that he was there with her. Otherwise, she would have forgotten the doctor, or anyone else, was there. That would mean abortion, unfortunately. The rays used in chemotherapy, along with the many chemicals, are too dangerous for the baby, especially in its first trimester. Everything was too much. She was living a crazy circle where sickness followed her everywhere. First her mother and now her. She wasn't sure if she could take it again, if she was strong enough to fight it the way her mother did. But even if she was, what use was it? The only chance she had was gone now. She would never put her unborn child in danger for her own health. She could see the road she once saw ahead get dimmer. The lights that had been brightly shining above it were flickering, giving their last breath just as her hope. There was no way out of the pit into which she had walked. The cards were turned now, and she knew exactly what her future held. Death. Her brain was suddenly realizing things she wished she was oblivious to, like the fact that she may never come to see Emily's graduation or even first prom date, the fact that she may not even live to see her unborn baby's first birthday. Such somber thoughts floated on the surface of her thoughts like ghosts, casting shadows over her soul, making her heart contract. Chapter 5. Ryan always loved mornings. They were a symbol of fresh starts or a blank page that was given to him every morning. He saw mornings like a chance to be a better him, a chance to love and work harder than the day before. That is why he never found it a bother to wake up early. He enjoyed watching the sun as it rose, as it woke up to cast its rays over the still sleeping city. He was always the one to find hope in the newly born light, to find motivation in the song of the birds or smell of the freshly cut grass. But that morning was different. He sat alone on a kitchen stool with a cold and untouched mug of coffee in his hand. He was still in his pajamas, his hair tangled and sticking in all directions. He had no idea of what the hour was, but he didn't bother to find out either. He simply didn't care. He was too busy thinking, or rather recalling, all the events that had occurred the night before. Whenever he blinked, he relived all the events of the night before, including the many tears that had been shed once the news was out. He had never felt this hopeless in his entire life. There was nothing they could do. There was nothing he could do. He wanted to help Kayla, to bring her hope, to dissolve that damn cloud that had settled upon her life, their life. But he couldn't. Kayla had made a decision, and as much as they tried to make her think about her decision, they couldn't change her mind. Truth be told, he never thought she would even consider the option of the chemotherapy. He knew his wife, knew how much she loved her baby. In fact, he doubted he would have done anything differently. Unfortunately, her love and their similarity in the way he would have done things did not solve anything. Kayla was still sick, and he still couldn't help her. Sighing, he ran a hand through his hair and stood up, leaving his still untouched coffee behind. He couldn't even sit without feeling like he was a complete loser. Unconsciously, he found himself walking towards Emily's room. His wife had chosen to sleep by their daughter the night before. He had checked up on them when he had woken up that morning, and they had both been asleep. He wondered if that was the case still. The house was silent. You couldn't hear anything aside from his careful footsteps. It was as if everyone was still lost in the world of careless dreams, but he doubted that. He doubted any of them had had a good night's sleep after last night's events. Emily's door was still slightly open, the way he had left it that morning. Through the crack, he could clearly see Kayla's brown hair sprawled against the pillow, creating a curtain around her face. She was asleep, her hand draping over Emily, holding her protectively against her body. Ryan felt like crying. His entire fortune was right in front of him. His entire world was on one bed, and he was about to lose it all with a blink of an eye. He was scared. He had never been this scared in his entire life. He felt as if he was sinking to the bottom of an ocean, and there was nothing he could do to save himself from drowning. He needed to be strong, though. He needed to keep their boat floating, although the icebergs ahead were threatening it at every corner. He remembered a time when Kayla had been in his position. Someone dear to her had been terminally ill, and all she could do was hope God would have mercy on them. He wondered how she had been so strong, because he couldn't be. He admired her even more now, knowing how it felt to be in her place. Sighing, he leaned against the door. He may have not been able to cure Kayla, but he was sure as hell able to keep her mind off of everything going on. Nodding, he took in a deep breath. He knew exactly what he needed to do now. He had to find a way to keep them both away from the thought of the future. They needed to live in the present, a beautiful present where they were both together, where Kayla was pregnant and ready to bring a healthy little sister or brother to the little angel sleeping in her arms. And he knew exactly how he was about to do everything. Smiling, he wiped the tear that was running down the bridge of his nose and retrieved his phone from his back pocket. He needed to make a few phone calls and talk to Tanya and his mother. He was going to need their help if he wished to keep everything a secret. "Come here, you little nugget," Meredith called as she ran around the living room table. Emily's laugh was loud, echoing through the otherwise silent house like thunder through the rain. Kayla found her lips curling in a smile. It was a small facial expression, one of the few she even bothered to put on that day. She enjoyed seeing her daughter happy and was mentally scolding herself for being unable to get out of that state of misery. She knew she would have to do so at some point. She didn't want Emily's last memories of her to be of a woman crying in the middle of the bed, walking around like a zombie. She wished Ryan was there, though. She needed him, and she would have appreciated if he took a day off of work. But then again, maybe he couldn't. He was a busy man and could hardly reschedule meetings. She had to understand that. Sighing, she ran a hand through her hair and stood up, dragging her feet behind her as she headed to grab a glass of water. She could feel her mom's eyes on her, following her every movement. She had been in Tanya's position before. She knew how powerless you felt when you could do nothing but watch the person you love die. Her mother had tried to talk to her, but Kayla had stopped her. She did not need any pep talk. She wasn't giving up, but she needed to live her grief. She needed to first sink into the darkness before she could even dream of breathing again. Inside the kitchen, Kayla sipped her glass of water silently. She leaned against the kitchen counter and closed her eyes. Her mind was quiet for the first time that day. She thought of nothing. She felt nothing. She had exhausted herself to the point where she was numb, and she wasn't complaining. That state of emptiness was far better than the constant reminder of the numbered days she now had. She knew she had to talk to her mother at some point, to allow her to tell her how she managed to do it all. She was the only one who could truly understand what Kayla was going through. Suddenly, the buzzing sound of a phone brought her out of her trail of thoughts. She had forgotten her phone was even there, stuck in the front pocket of her cardigan. Slowly, she removed it. She lazily brushed her finger across the screen, tapping against it until the black screen burst into colors. Ryan's name was the first thing she noticed. It was one of the many names in her notification bar. Seeing his name flash across her screen wasn't something that would surprise her. He often sent her messages and asked about her day while he was at work. But what actually surprised her were the words within the message. Over 5 years ago, I took this beautiful woman on a trip. It was my way of escaping the complicated world in which we lived. It's time we do so again. I will be waiting for Emily and you outside. Kayla frowned, her feet immediately carrying her the window. Her hands brushed the curtain away, allowing her free sight to the front lawn. As expected, Ryan was there, leaning against his car. His hands were still holding onto his phone, his eyes gazing at the screen, probably expecting a message back. Seeing him like that, waiting for her with the message in hand, aroused a sudden feeling of déjà vu in Kayla. She raised a brow and turned around, her head turning to look at the door. Her mom stood there with a black bag in hand, holding Emily with the other. She was looking at Kayla with a smile on her lips. "Grandma said Daddy is taking us on a trip," Emily squealed, looking between Kayla and her grandmother. "Apparently he is. But how did you know?" Kayla asked, looking at her mother with a raised brow. "He had to tell someone. Who else was going to pack your bags?" "But where is he taking us?" Kayla asked. "That, my dear, is not mine to tell. You get your ass outside and see what your husband has to say." Her mother was trying hard not to smile. Her lips were trembling, trying not to curve. Kayla wasn't very sure what to think of the surprise. Sure, it was a nice distraction, a beautiful gesture that arose memories she cherished above everything else. But still, Ryan should have told her about it. He should have allowed her time. She needed to think about everything that was going on. They had to if they even wished to solve anything. But despite all that, there was no point in telling her mother all that. She was simply a messenger. She needed to talk to Ryan about it, and unfortunately, she was bound to wait until they were alone. "Come on, Mommy." Emily was beyond excited, and she had every right to be. She didn't often get the chance to go on trips with both of her parents. Her daughter didn't even wait for a response. She excitedly ran out the back door. "I didn't even get to change," Kayla exclaimed. She didn't need a mirror to know that she looked worn out. Her faded jeans and white shirt were as dull as the gray cardigan she had on. Those clothes had felt right that morning, when she had gazed into her closet, seeking something in which she would be able to cry comfortably in. But now, when she was on the merge of leaving on a special road trip, she wasn't so sure anymore. "You look beautiful. Plus, I packed some cute outfits you will be able to clean up just nicely." "But, no buts, darling. You are going on that trip. He is only taking you for the weekend. You get 2 days off. Only 2. And after that, you will be able to stay and pity yourself in your pajamas all you want," her mother joked, making her lowly chuckle. Tanya was right, and Kayla knew that. She needed a clear mind to find a solution to everything that was happening. She needed to get out of the role in which she was the victim of a tragic occurrence. She may have been dying, but she was alive for now, and she damn well needed to feel so. "Thank you, Mom." Kayla's arms wrapped around her mother without hesitation, pulling her in a tight hug. Feeling her mother so close to her, with her familiar perfume lingering in the air she was inhaling, made Kayla feel safe. They had been through so much together, and she was more than sure they could endure one more round of whatever life was willing to throw their way. "You didn't!" Kayla exclaimed, her hand flying to cover her mouth as she looked around her. Kayla twirled around slowly, her eyes trying hard to take it all in. Everything was the way she remembered it. The barn where she had snuck out when her dad was still alive, the little house just down the road. Even the grass seemed to be the exact same height that it had been the last time she visited it. Looking around her, it was as if she could see visions of the past, ghosts wandering around her, reminding her of the memories she cherished more than life itself. Being back there reminded her of the time when she and Ryan were still unsure of what they were, when the love between them had been a simple attraction, enhanced by the baby growing inside her belly. That had been different times, of course. They held their own beauty, their own magic. Those days made them what they were today, the couple and the parents they declared themselves to be. "How did you rent the house? That house was never up for rent." "That is for me to know, and for you to enjoy," he smirked. "Where are we?" Emily's voice could be heard from behind her. She could sense the excitement in it without even looking. "This is where Mom and I took our first trip." "Is that true?" Emily asked, and Kayla turned around and smiled, looking through her lashes between Ryan and her daughter. "Yeah, he made it a surprise back then too," she said. Unfortunately, that was all they could share about the place. Emily was still too young to understand why that place meant the world to Kayla. She was too young to be introduced to the thought of death or the thought of losing a parent the way Kayla did. Ironic as it was, that was why Kayla had always refused to mention her father in front of Emily. But it seemed that the one thing she tried protecting her daughter from was following her. If things kept proceeding the way they had been, she was bound to be mentioning such dull things to Emily after all. "Do you see that house down the road, Em?" Ryan asked, as he kneeled beside her, his finger pointing at the blue little cottage not far from the barn by which they stood. "Yeah." Kayla had seen that house before. She had admired it every time she went there. She loved how cozy it looked, how homey and welcoming the simple design was. In fact, she remembered mentioning it to Ryan all those years ago. She remembered saying something along the lines of, "I wish they would rent that place. I would do anything to stay there at least one night. That will be our home for the weekend." Ryan looked Kayla in the eyes as he spoke those words, his gaze seeking her reaction. Kayla gasped as she heard those words. There was no way he would remember what she had said. Too much time had passed by. And yet, the proof that he did indeed remember was right there. Kayla felt like crying again for the 10th time that day. Only this time, she wanted to do so because of how overwhelmed she was. She did not know what she had done to deserve such happiness, but she appreciated it. She was loved and supported by the best man in the world. God may have tried her countless times now, but he had rewarded her too. But before we go there and show Mommy the little surprise I planned for her, we are going to show you yours. "A surprise? Where is it?" Emily looked around, her green dress flouting around her as she ran around Ryan in excitement. Kayla shook her head and chuckled, her head shaking slightly. "Right there." That was when Emily and Kayla first noticed it. The 3 horses at the fence right by the barn. They were all brown with long manes draping from their sides. There was also a man there tending to the smallest horse, feeding it fresh hay from the big basket to his right. The man did not pay them any attention. He kept on petting the horse and feeding it, while Kayla and Emily stared. "Well, are we going to ride or are we going to stay here all day?" Ryan asked. That was all it took for Emily to go wild. She grabbed her dad's hand and dragged him through the grass and toward the horses. Her squeals could be heard in the distance, echoing through the empty area around them. Kayla took a minute to watch them. Seeing Ryan and Emily this happy filled her heart with a warmth she couldn't feel otherwise. Soon enough, another soul would be blessed with that kind of unconditional love, and nothing could make her happier. Unlike them, she took her time to approach them, watching as the instructor Ryan hired help Emily onto the horse. It was Emily's first time on a horse, and surprisingly, she wasn't the least scared. Kayla, however, was, even though this was the third time she would go on horseback. She wasn't one to hate adrenaline, but she wasn't a fan either. "Ready?" "Not really, I haven't done this in ages." She laughed, her eyes leaving Emily for the first time. "Don't worry, I got you," Ryan whispered in her ear as he came to stand behind her. He placed his hands on her waist as she grabbed the saddle. His arms followed her body as she hopped onto the horse, his fingers tracing her sides, making a chill run down her spine. He was doing everything intentionally. He knew well enough how her body reacted to him, and he was enjoying every second of it. His hands left her body as fast as they came. He left her alone as he went to hop onto his own horse. From the corner of her eyes, she saw the instructor behind Emily, holding her in place, making sure she wouldn't fall off of the horse as they rode. Her daughter was smiling, engaged in a conversation with the man. Looking closer at him, Kayla noticed he was older than she first expected, with white hair outlining his head. He looked happy to ride with Emily, probably enjoying the colorful stories she was narrating. "Please lead the way, Mr. Connor." Ryan motioned for the old man, who immediately took off in a gallop down the pathway. Kayla had forgotten how free it felt to feel the wind blowing in her hair at such intensity. She had forgotten how good it was to feel the sun on your skin as you galloped. But she remembered now. Her heart was beating fast, pumping blood through her veins, supplying her entire body with waves of adrenaline. Her lips curved in a smile on their own, her eyes closing for a fraction of a second as she processed the mixed emotions. The activity did her well. It reminded her how beautiful life tasted, how much she was going to miss everything on this earth. But most of all, it reminded her that she should not die before her heart stopped. She needed to fight, if not for her life, at least for making the most of what remained of her days. Chapter 6. The house was even better than Kayla had ever imagined. She had spent years imagining how that house would look. She had imagined a beautiful classic design on the inside. Something not too classy, but of good taste. And she had been right about that. Kayla took her time to admire everything as she waited for Ryan to put Emily to sleep. She admired the beautiful paintings on the walls, paintings that captured every season in its ultimate beauty. Each one showed the same scenario, a beautiful lake encircled by trees. It reflected the imprint each season had on the water of the lake and on the branches of the guardians around it. She loved the spring one most of all. The trees bared beautiful pink flowers glistering beneath the cascading light. You could still spot snow here and there, melting under the influence of the heat. The lake was no longer icy. The water was glistening, mirroring the clear sky above. She wondered if the scenario was real or if it simply was a fictional place in the mind of the artist. The paintings were probably the most precious thing in the entire living room. The furniture seemed old and worn out, but it still held its beauty. There were 2 gray couches with red and blue pillows scattered around. There was also a blue, fluffy blanket draping over the arm of one couch. Closing her eyes, she took in a deep breath and sank into the silence around her. It was so nice to be away from the busy streets of the city. She adored when she was able to actually hear the white noises of the night, the crickets and the wind, or when she was actually able to smell the scent of flowers and grass. She was old-fashioned like that. "You like it?" Ryan's voice caught her by surprise. She had been so deep in thought that she had failed to notice his presence. He was already behind her, hugging her from the back, his head resting on her shoulder as they both continued to look at the pictures Kayla had been admiring. Kayla nodded and took his hand, guiding his fingers to her mouth, where she kissed his knuckles. Yes, I still can't believe we get to spend the weekend here. This house is exactly what I have always imagined for myself. This and every other weekend, if you wish. It took Kayla a few seconds to process his words. With one swift move, she turned around and frowned, her head slightly leaning to the right as her eyes bore into his. What do you mean? She already had a vague idea of what he was implying. She wasn't stupid, and she had learned how to read in between her husband's lines. But still, the idea seemed too absurd to her. She must have understood wrong. His hand went to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing over her soft skin gently. He looked at her with such gentleness. It was as if he was afraid she would shatter if he looked at her too hard. He had never seen her as a fragile object. He always considered her to be the strongest human being he had ever met, even stronger than himself. But now, knowing their time may be limited, made him afraid. It scared him. This place is now yours. I should have done this a long time ago. But how? I mean, there was so much she meant to ask him. Like why? He shouldn't have. Or when did he have time to buy it? This morning when I woke up, I kept thinking, and suddenly, I remembered how you mentioned this place before. I made a few phone calls, found out the people who lived here moved a while ago, and offered to pay double the price if they signed the contract today. Kayla was speechless. There was no way she deserved all that. But Ryan shook his head. His finger moved to rest over her lips in an attempt to silence her. Not now. Come. Let me show you our room. It was real. They actually owned the house now. It was the first house they could call their own. Sure, they had the mansion, but that was a house for everyone. For them, their mothers. But that, the little cottage just outside the city, was all theirs. They could call it home. They could do as they pleased there. The thought of it made Kayla squeal. She was so happy she felt she was going to burst. Their cottage only had 4 rooms, a kitchen and a living room, and the master bedroom was right across from Emily's room. It wasn't that huge. It was far smaller than their space back in the mansion, but it had another air to it. She could imagine how warm it would feel to spend the winter there, by the fire reading and talking all night long. The bed was king-size, with a mahogany board that matched the color of the closet in front of it. The decor wasn't as broad as the one in the living room, but that wasn't a problem. It left space for Kayla to play with it as she pleased. Ryan, all of this, it's way too much. You shouldn't have. I should have. In fact, I should have done it a long time ago. I am sorry I had to wait for something like this to happen before I thought of it. She could sense the conversation was going in the direction of her disease. He wanted to talk about it, to make sure she was fine with it. And maybe they should have talked. In fact, they needed to. But not that night. Everything was way too beautiful to be ruined with something so gloomy. Instead, she decided to take everything in a whole other direction. Before he could even process her actions, she pushed him against the wall and glued her mouth to his. Their lips immediately molded over one another, fitting like 2 pieces of a puzzle.
Oh no, this adult scene has been taken out and is exclusively available for Romancely Premium members. Check the description below to sign up. The love scene reference is The CEO's New Baby, Chapter 6, Love Scene 2.
Kayla's head was resting over Ryan's, her ear pressing against her chest, allowing her to clearly hear his still chaotic heartbeat. Kayla didn't think she would be able to sleep. There were so many things going on in her mind. But just like every other time, Ryan had been her cure. He had brought silence to her mind. Sleeping by his side was like taking a painkiller. She didn't feel anything else, nothing but the happiness he bestowed on her. I love you, was the last thing she muttered before sleep finally took over. The last time Kayla had cooked something felt like it had been too long ago. She had almost forgotten how bad she was at it, or how much she struggled only for some scrambled eggs. But, thankfully, Moments like that were there to remind her. Kayla winced as her finger touched the hot surface of the pan for the millionth time that morning. Her fingertips ached as she tried to unfold the pancake she had wrongly flipped. The entire breakfast thing was definitely not going according to plan, but that did not mean it wasn't going to be good. Or at least, that was what she told herself. Taking in a deep breath, she unfolded the pancake and proceeded to check on the bacon, all the while her hips kept swaying to the sound of the song she had blasting through the speakers of her phone. The smell of coffee was the most prominent. It was strong and aromatic, just the way she liked it. In fact, she would bet that the smell would be the thing that would wake Ryan up. Her daughter was more like her. Food would be the one thing that would get her out of bed. In fact, she was expecting them both to wake up any moment now. They usually woke up around 10 every morning. She hoped that day would not be an exception. It would have been a pain in the ass to be the one who needed to wake them up. I would have asked, "What have you done with my wife?" but the mess in here assures me it is you. Speaking of the devil, Ryan was standing in the doorframe, his hair sticking in all directions. He was wearing a pair of sweatpants and the same white shirt he had been wearing the day before. His voice was still heavy with sleep, his eyes a bit red too. "If you say one more word, mister, you ain't getting any breakfast." Kayla pointed with the spatula towards him, her eyes narrow, trying hard to look threatening. Ryan chuckled and rose his arms in defense. The kitchen was small, so it did not take him more than 3 steps to get to her. He removed the spatula from her hand and pressed his body to her. He was as close as he could be, his breath fanning her face, his lips hovering above hers. His blue orbs met with hers, allowing a wave of electricity to surge through her skin. He was about to kiss her when a voice came from behind them. "Good morning." The little voice made them both jump. Somehow, Ryan landed right by the door while Kayla tried to regain her posture. "Morning, darling." Kayla smiled, reaching for her daughter right after turning off the stove. She kissed her daughter on the cheek before giving her a tight hug. "Did you sleep well?" Emily was still too sleepy to carry on a conversation, so instead of answering, she just nodded as she rubbed her left eye with the back of her hand. "You made pancakes?" "Yep. They aren't as good as your dad's, but you have to bear with me." Kayla chuckled. "I forgot Mr. Snuggles." Emily was out the door before either of them got to react. Not that they had much to say about it. It was no news that Emily could not go a second in the morning or at night without her bear. Is she ever going to grow out of loving that bear? Kayla laughed as she placed the 2 plates she had been holding on the small round table. "At least she is not attached to an action figure the way I was." "You are still upset that she didn't like that toy, aren't you?" "It haunts me every night." He sighed as he slipped onto a chair. "Well, you still have a chance. Pray to God this one does, because I can't assure you a 3rd chance. Anyway, moving on to more serious matters." "Did you just call my action figure unimportant?" Ryan interrupted, trying to look offended. Kayla, on the other hand, just rolled her eyes and shook her head, deciding to ignore his comment. "I've been thinking since morning. This can't be good." "What can't be good?" Emily asked, as she entered the kitchen once again, her tiny arm wrapped around her pink bear. "Mom having ideas." Unlike Kayla, Emily seemed to find the retort funny, her giggles being the solid proof of that. "Ryan?" Kayla was in no way offended, but she sure liked to pretend she was. She loved the way Ryan panicked for the slightest of seconds. "I will get you for that," she threatened, pointing at him with the fork she had in hand. "Peace? Nice try." While Kayla and Ryan fooled around, Emily seemed to have the fun of her life. She kept suppressing giggles as she stole spoons of chocolate from the bowl in front of them. What she didn't know, however, was that her mom had actually seen her, but chose to just pose as the good cop that day. "So what did you want to say?" "This morning, I realized I wanted to do something. I am tired of just sitting around. Everything that has been happening made me realize I want to leave something behind me. I want to have my memory imprinted somewhere." "What exactly did you think of leaving behind?" "A bakery?" She knew Ryan would find the idea funny, especially with the breakfast he had in front of him. But she was actually serious about it. She had thought about it. In fact, she had been thinking about it for a while now, but had been quiet. You don't need to be so surprised. I know what you are thinking, but I won't be the one cooking. We will have a baker and everything. Actually, I didn't mean to say that. I actually think it is a wonderful idea. Chapter 7. If Kayla tried to describe the moment she was living, she would certainly fail. There was no way in which she could tell people how emotional she felt. She felt as if her heart would burst out of her chest. Her entire body was reacting to the image in front of her. If she had to think of a way to put everything together, it was safe to say that she was experiencing a hurricane of feelings. It was like a rainbow after a storm, a wave that washed over her and made her body tremble and shake. But even if she was to put it that way, people would still not understand how it felt to see your baby for the first time. The little image, the shadow on the screen, was as good as holding it. It made the entire thing feel real. It made her mind truly wrap around the fact that she was going to be a mother once again. It was still too early to listen to the little one's heart, but she could imagine what it sounded like. It must be just as magical as its sisters had been. Is that really our baby? Ryan whispered from beside her. He seemed just as emotional as she was. In fact, she could swear she saw some unshed tears in his eyes, but the light in the room was too dim to actually pay attention to that. I guess so, she said, squeezing his hand as she took another glance at the screen. The doctor was the same one who helped her deliver Emily, so she was pretty relaxed, unlike the first time around when she had been scared and unsure of how things would unfold. Well, Kayla, I am pleased to inform you that the pregnancy is going according to plan. Your baby is healthy and is about 1 month old. Now, you were mentioning chemotherapy, the doctor began, as she wiped the gel off of the instrument she had been using. Kayla nodded, brushing a wipe over her belly. It is still too early to discuss, but if things go the way we expect them to, and the baby is still as healthy as it is now, you may be able to start treatment after the 4th month. You mean we will be able to get treatment before the pregnancy ends? Ryan was the only one who could talk between the two of them. Kayla was unable to. She was too busy processing the possibility of actually being able to live through it all. The doctor laughed. She was happy to be able to give some hope to the couple. Hopefully, yes. Of course, that also depends on what her doctor says. They didn't care anymore. Those were all details. They now had hope. Hope that Kayla had been unable to see before. And she thanked the doctor for that. She had been able to deliver some good news. Thinking about it, Kayla felt like scolding herself. She had been so fast in losing hope and giving up. She had forgotten to look at the bright side of things, at the light at the end of the tunnel. She had been weak for the slightest of seconds, and that almost cost her the happiness of her family. She promised herself she would never do that ever again. Thank you, really. She meant it. The doctor nodded and stood up. My pleasure. I will give you two a moment alone. Kayla did not see it coming, but Ryan did not waste a single second. He pulled her closer to him and wrapped his lips around hers. She could read his thoughts in that single kiss. The way he projected his happiness in the passion and heat of that one single kiss. It was his way of saying, it's all going to be okay. Kayla would have pulled back. She was never one to kiss in such public places. But she felt the same as him. Do you really think we will be able to get through this? Almost a week had gone by since she first discovered her diagnosis, and throughout this period, she had been too afraid to ask that question. She feared the response, feared that she would hear something that would make her completely lose her mind and faith. I am sure we will. Now come on, we have places to be. Ryan hated talking about it as much as she did. They both agreed that acknowledging the disease only made things worse. It gave it importance, and somehow, giving it importance felt like allowing it to have a proper place in their lives, a thing that they surely did not want nor wished for. Wait, what? Where do we have to go? That, my dear wife, is a secret. Kayla shook her head and smiled, immediately jumping from the bed on which she was laying. She knew there was no point in asking again. Ryan was never going to tell her what he had prepared, but oddly enough, this time around, she didn't wish to know beforehand. She was in the mood for a surprise, whatever that was. Can I open my eyes now? Kayla was trying hard to fight the temptation of peeking. She was bad with surprises, and even after all these years, her husband still failed to understand that. She could hear the sound of keys, of a lock being opened. The sounds made her frown and urged her to open her eyes even more. But she fought that urge. Ryan had worked hard on the surprise. He always did. And ruining it would only make it all in vain. Just 1 second, he groaned. He seemed to be struggling with whatever he was doing. Okay, now. His hand touched her elbow, guiding her a few steps before she finally removed her hands from her eyes. It took her a few moments to take it all in. The light inside the room was dim. The rays of the dying sun seemed to find it hard to penetrate through the dirty windows and dusty curtains. It took Kayla even more time to realize what they were doing there. "Is this?" she asked, looking at Ryan for a few seconds before gazing at the room once again. Her feet seemed to have a mind of their own, moving through the few round tables scattered around the dusty room. "This is your bakery, or at least will be, as soon as we clean this place up and add some color." He wrinkled his nose as he touched the surface of the table by him. The air around them was thick, heavy with dirt. It needed some air that was for sure, and light. It needed a lot of light. But despite that, Kayla had to admit the place was beautiful. It was spacious, but not too big, with a fireplace right in the corner, an element that could change the entire decor of the place, especially during the holiday season. There was also a counter at the far end, a place where Kayla would be able to display her pastries. Right behind the counter there was a door that surely lead into a kitchen she was yet to discover. All in all, everything fit the vision she had created back at the cottage. "Ryan, I don't know what to say," she gushed. She truly didn't. He was being wonderful. He was treating her the way every woman deserved to be treated. Everyone told her that the love in a marriage dissolved with time, especially after the appearance of kids. She had expected them to be right. After all, she never got to see a couple grow together. She expected him to grow a bit colder, to quit the surprises, the romantic dinners, or gentle gestures. But he never did. In fact, the more time passed, the more he showed her how much she meant to him. And in return, she showered him with the same love he felt. "You don't need to say anything, just be healthy," he wanted to say. He wanted to say it so badly, but held himself from uttering those words. They scared him. Only thinking about it made his body shake with fear. He couldn't even imagine a world where Kayla wouldn't be her happy, energetic, usual self. A world where Kayla wasn't by his side didn't even exist in his vocabulary. There was no way he could breathe without her by his side. "Just make sure you turn this place into the next sensation," he said instead. Truth be told, he didn't want her to think he was doing all this just because she was sick, because by God that was surely not the case. He was doing it because he loved seeing her smile. He loved the way her cheeks raised whenever her lips curled, and the way her eyes shone whenever he did something sweet. He wanted her to know he was there for her, that he supported every dream of hers the same way he supported his own. "If you want, we can hire a designer, maybe some men to start painting the entire place." He shrugged, his hands slipping in his pockets as he looked around. "No, I want to do everything myself. I already have a few ideas for the place." She smiled as she took in a deep breath. "Fortunately, you are better with designs than you are with baking, so hopefully it will end up just fine." He chuckled. Kayla slapped him playfully across the arm, looking at him between her lashes. "Take it back," she warned. "Oh yeah? Make me." He knew what kind of game he was getting himself into. He was doing it willingly. In fact, he was doing it with pleasure. The door to the shop was closed before she even said anything. The cracking sound echoed around them even after she had approached him. Her hand was resting on his shoulder, her fingers tracing his chest as her hand went lower and lower. She was ready to tease him, to make him regret ever wishing to play that game. "Make you?" she whispered, right before her tongue licked his earlobe. She could hear him gulp, his Adam's apple going up and down as he tried to breathe. She knew she was turning him on, that he was already feeling the heat radiating through his body, spreading on the surface of his blood like burning hot lava. She meant for that to happen. Just as her hands reached the tip of his belt, he took in a deep breath, expecting her to grab him. His entire body wanted that, craved and expected that. But no, that wasn't the game she was playing. Nah, I will let it slide today. And just like that, she left him hot and bothered. That is a low blow, Ryan objected. True, but you got to admit, it was a good one. She chuckled, taking a seat on the silver chair by the table. Ryan wrinkled his nose for a second and then burst into a fit of laughter. Okay, it was good. They took a few moments to look around, to take in the finest of details. So, do you have an idea of what you want to do with the place? She had a few ideas. The place was promising. It had a nice view, nice architecture. All it needed was some time and attention. And thankfully, Kayla was more than ready to give it both of those things. I want something colorful. I want to turn this place into a place in which kids would love to come. I am still unsure of how to do that, but I am sure it will come to me. She had to admit, Emily had been her inspiration. She wanted to create a place inspired by her daughter, a place through which Emily would be able to remember her long after she was gone. At least that had been her initial thought. But now, after seeing the doctor, she had to admit that her reasons were slightly shifting, metamorphosing into something happier. Chapter 8. No, not there. The color of the roses have nothing to do with those of the lavender Meredith had placed in the corner, Kayla shouted from the kitchen door. Ryan tried hard not to burst into a fit of laughter, his lips pressing onto one another as he swallowed the chuckle that threatened to vibrate through his chest. Kayla was worse than a Bradzilla. He had never thought her to be so attentive to details such as the matching colors of flowers. It was funny, however, to watch her walk around, her long hair wrapped in a very messy bun. Her clothes were wrinkled too. The blue button-up shirt she was wearing clung to her small baby bump, showing off its curve whenever she moved. The black apron she had on top only accentuated it more. He must have done something to grab her attention because she immediately turned his way, her eyes meeting his. She was serious. In fact, he doubted he had ever seen her so motivated in her life. But then again, he did not blame her. The opening was only a day away, and she had to make sure that all the work she had invested during the last 3 months wouldn't disappear. Stop smiling and come here, I need you in the kitchen. It was Meredith who chuckled this time around. She looked at her son and smiled, knowing well enough that it was his time to get scolded. Here, take these to... Kayla had begun walking away before he even completely entered the kitchen, her hands shoving a stack of papers in his face. They were probably the invitations they printed out a week ago. Ryan took the papers, but placed them on the counter beside him before she even got to finish the sentence. Ryan! Indeed, he once again agreed that Kayla looked incredibly cute while angry. She looked like a kid with her wrinkled nose and wide eyes. Her small hands curled into fists as if she was going to launch towards him any moment now. He did not let her to say anything else. Instead, he wrapped her hands around her and pinned her against the wall behind him. The impact, although low, made her gasp, his close presence making it suddenly hard to breathe or focus. She opened her mouth again to say something, but her brain failed to think. Ryan's lips hovered above hers for a second before he folded them together with a swift move. The kiss was not long. It merely lasted as long as the blink of an eye, but it had been enough to make her lose the firm posture she had had before. Breathe, he whispered, his hand slipping under her chin, raising it so their eyes could meet. Everything is ready. You don't need to worry about anything else. But the opening is tomorrow, and we have to finish everything before the baker arrives, and we still have to recheck the list. And... He kissed her again. He was like her drug, her painkiller, her sedative. Whenever she needed him, mind and body, he was there. His kiss could make everything better. Okay, I am breathing. Ryan chuckled as he pulled away, his hand still holding onto her arm. Okay, I will go give these to my secretary. She will mail them out. I will have to spend some time at the office, though. Is it okay? Of course. You need to finish your work. Now come on, off you go. I need to clean this mess up before the cook arrives. Just as Ryan was about to leave, Emily danced her way into the kitchen. Her pink dress swirled around her legs as she twirled through the door. Kayla thanked her lucky stars that she did not come in a minute ago. She and Ryan often found themselves in such positions. "Mom, can we go home? I am bored." "Oh, darling, I am sorry. I didn't have much time for you today." It was true. Kayla had been so busy with the final details of the bakery that she had failed to give her daughter much attention. "Why don't you come with me? We can get ice cream on our way to the office, and you can play on my computer while I sign some documents." That fun wasn't any more fun than the bakery at this point. But she loved being there anyway. Kayla knew immediately that her daughter would love the idea. The little girl nodded and jumped in his arms, her hands holding onto his neck as she showered her dad with kisses. "Kayla, Mr. Barson is here," her mom's voice suddenly said, as Tanya peeked her head through the partially open door. The news made Kayla enter a sudden zone of panic. The baker had arrived before she got to finish her work in the kitchen. She closed her eyes and took in a deep breath. She needed to calm down, or otherwise she wouldn't get anything done. "Okay, I will be out in a moment. As for you two," she meant Ryan more. He had distracted her, and now she was late. "We are out." He chuckled, already exiting the room with Emily in his arms, and the invitations stuck under his left arm. Kayla followed them outside, her hands moving over her black apron, trying to smooth out the wrinkles, although she knew that her current state was beyond repairing. She had been moving around since morning, and it was more than evident. She could feel her hair sitting on the crest of her head like a bird nest. "Pete, you arrived!" She tried to look excited as she welcomed her new employee. While she walked, Kayla could feel her head going lighter, her vision blurring a bit before going back to normal. Not now was all she could think. She could not afford to faint or become sick. Not there, not at that moment. She had so much to do, and no one aside from her could do it. Pete was an old man with a big beard and short white hair. His eyes were icy blue, contrasting with the pink tint in his cheeks. When Kayla first met him, she could have sworn that if Santa Claus was real, he would be him. Emily had loved him too, but then again, Emily loved anyone who brought her cupcakes and candy. But despite his charisma and warm looks, his baking was beyond everything else. The dough he made was divine. It was sweet and soft. You could taste each and every aroma he added in the mix. Kayla had never tasted anything like it before. And hopefully, the customers would think the same. "Kayla, you look horrible, I know," she joked. Another thing about Peter was that his personality was sparkly. He was the kind of man with whom you could get along with almost instantly. He would joke and laugh around from the first second, skipping the awkward part altogether. They had known each other for 2 months now. He had been an important element in the entire process of getting the bakery to where it was that day. "I was going to say focused, but—" Kayla narrowed her eyes and fought a smile, but she had to admit, the line was pretty good. "So did you bring everything?" she said, sighing. "Yep, we are ready to start baking." It was night outside. The sun had long ago settled. Inside the bakery, the only light breaking through the darkness was that coming from the kitchen. Everything was in place and ready for the coming day. There were blue ribbons on the chair, baskets of bread, and sweet cupcakes sat on the counter, right by the row of colorful lollipops. The balloons were still to be hung, so were the boxes of decorations Kayla was yet to open. But she wasn't worried anymore. The worst had passed. She and every single member of her family had managed to work their asses off until the bakery had come to be what it was at that specific hour. Ryan was supposed to arrive any minute now. He had dropped Emily off and said he would come help settle the kitchen down. "Here, try this," Peter said, shoving a lemon tart in her face. Truth be told, Kayla had eaten so much. She had tried the chocolate cookies, the strawberry pudding, everything. And she was more than sure that if she hadn't been pregnant, there was no way she would live through the sugar rush that was coming her way. "You know, you are pretty good at decorating stuff," Peter said, as he took out the last tray of tarts from the oven. "Yeah? Well, you know, the first thing I ever decorated was Emily's room." Kayla remembered that day vividly. It was the first time she ever slept with Ryan. It was when everything started. Sometimes she wondered if he ever thought back to that day, the day when her title shifted from surrogate mother to more. because she often did. Maybe everything would have been different today had they not kissed in the nursery. Really? Judging by the house you own, I bet the nursery was covered in silver and gold. She knew what he meant by that, and that would have surely been the case had she not mentioned to Ryan how she liked simple stuff. Not really. We bought the entire nursery from a commercial store downtown. You know, we've known each other for 2 months. I know you and Ryan, but neither of you ever mentioned how you two met. He rested his hands on the counter and looked at her from beneath his bushy eyebrows. My mom hired her to be Emily's surrogate mother. Kayla did not see Ryan enter until he spoke. His voice was filled with amusement, his eyes twinkling as he placed the plastic bag he had been holding next to her. He loved telling the story. He never missed an opportunity to tell people of their ironic beginning. In all honesty, she loved it too. It showed how life always found a way to bring two people together. It hadn't even been him who hired her. It had been his mom. And from all the people who she could have chosen, she chose Kayla. It had been a sign that they were meant to be together, that they were a match made in heaven. Well, that was unexpected, Peter chuckled, as he wiped his hands with the white towel that had been draping from his shoulder. Come on, guys, I brought food. We still have a lot of work to do, and we need the energy. The smell of fries and burgers was like heaven to Kayla. She had been craving fast food since morning, but had been too busy to even mention it to anyone. She was not hungry, but her body definitely needed something that wasn't sweet or filled with chocolate. I am not really hungry. I finished my work anyway. I think I will head home so I can come bake the bread early in the morning. Pete motioned around with his hands, pointing at the trays scattered around. He had been working all day, sitting by the ovens. You go home, you need to rest. Ryan and I will do the rest. Kayla knew that Peter left them with a heavy heart. She could tell how badly he wanted to stay around and help with the final preparations. But unlike them, he wasn't young anymore and his body needed sleep in order to function. There wasn't much he could do anyway. Good night then. See you in the morning. He smiled and dropped his apron on the counter before waving goodbye. Ryan and Kayla were alone once again, surrounded by trays of desserts and pastries. Ryan had never seen so much food in one place. He had to admit, at first he was skeptical about the entire thing. He had never looked into bakeries, never even thought of investing in one. But he had believed in Kayla's dreams. He had believed that she could make it work. And he had been right. She had done an incredible job. Are those brownies? Ryan suddenly asked, standing up from where he had been sitting. His eyes did not gaze at her, not even for the slightest second. He was too busy looking at the tray of brownies the baker had prepared a few hours back. Yes, but you aren't allowed to have any. Those are for tomorrow. She walked towards him, her hand grabbing onto the tray, ready to move it away from her husband's hungry eyes. Is that how it's going to be? And just like that, Ryan's move changed to playful. He challenged her as he asked that, his eyes looking deep into hers, daring her to answer. That is exactly how it's going to be. Now step aside. I need to put these in a safe place. He was faster than she had expected. His arms immediately extended and he grabbed the tray, placing it back where it had previously been. The next move was expected. She saw it coming, but her body still reacted surprised to it. With one quick move, he grabbed her by the waist and lifted her, her legs immediately wrapping around his torso.
Oh no, this adult scene has been taken out and is exclusively available for Romancely Premium members. Check the description below to sign up. The love scene reference is The CEO's New Baby, Chapter 8, Love Scene 3.
But after that day, they surely would, because the ecstasy filled with the adrenaline of someone showing up was far beyond anything they had expected. Chapter 9. If anyone would have talked to her 10 years ago and would have asked her where she saw herself that day, she would have probably imagined everything but that. She had always lived a normal life and had imagined the best for herself, but never, not in her wildest dreams, would she have expected to actually be able to open her own business. Even after preparing for months, she still couldn't get used to the fact. But she had to, because starting that morning, the business would become official. Taking in a deep breath, she tried to get rid of the surreal feeling in the pit of her stomach and clear her head. She needed to finish getting ready if she hoped to make it in time to her own opening. Nodding, she grabbed the comb once again and continued styling her hair, giving extra attention to the strands framing her face. Her look wasn't extra altogether. It was composed of simple yet classy things that caught life whenever Kayla wore them. The pink loose dress and red stilettos simply outlined her body and made her look classy and chic. Adding to it all, she made sure to wear the necklace her daughter got her for Mother's Day and the pair of earrings she had received from Ryan the Christmas before. She tried adding as much meaning into her outfit as possible. Even if no one would notice, she wanted everyone to know that if it hadn't been for her family, she would have never been there. She owed each and every one of them a part of her soul, because if it weren't for them, she would have withered and died a long time ago. Sighing, she ran a hand through the strand that she had just curled and undid the strands, creating a smooth curl that matched all the others that were already cascading down her back. Her look was coming all together. Suddenly a knock came on the door just as she was curling the last strand of hair. Without even sparing the door a glance, she welcomed whoever it was inside. Slowly, Ryan first peeked through the door before he slipped his entire body in. He had been at work that morning trying to finish off the documents that needed to be signed before the opening. Kayla had no idea when he managed to do all that. Wake up, go to work, and come back, all that in just a couple of hours. Somehow she felt guilty for that. The tight time surely had been stressful. But she promised herself she would make it up to him later. Well, someone looks dashing today. She winked as she approached him, her hands resting on his chest before she rose on her toes to kiss him. Look who is talking. You look absolutely magnificent. She had hoped he would say that. She had put a bit of thought into that outfit. She had meant to show the baby bump, but she had hoped she would do that in a decent and classy kind of way. And apparently, she had succeeded. Why, thank you. Her arms were around his neck by now, her legs crossed as she kissed him. You know, I would stay here the entire morning, but unfortunately, Peter just announced me that some paparazzi landed on our bakery's front door, and we will need to be there sooner to arrange for the opening. Paparazzi? Yeah, someone must have told them. They have been waiting there since morning. I doubt they will go away. But we didn't plan for that. We aren't ready for that kind of opening. Having an opening with cameras meant putting in double the effort she had already invested. It took way more than some colored balloons and matching ribbons. Kayla, relax. The bakery looks great, you look great. Everything and everyone is prepared for that kind for opening. Ryan had this gift where he could get anyone to believe what he had to say. He could be telling you the sky is red and you would just sit there and nod like an idiot. That was partially what was happening to Kayla. Despite the fact that she did not believe a word he said, she couldn't deny him. It wasn't his fault those men found out, nor was it his fault that he was famous enough to unconsciously affect her business. So, instead of crying, she would just suck it in and go with it. Okay, fine. I guess you are right, she sighed. Ryan couldn't be happier that the news he had just shared with her did not ruin her mood altogether. He had been worried about that ever since he found out. Okay, great. Now let's go. Your mother told me they are all ready and waiting for you. When Kayla had imagined her opening, she had foreseen something small, not too chaotic. She assumed that not that many people would actually be interested in the opening of a small bakery down the street. They had even sent some invitations a day before, not leaving people much time to prepare. She had hoped that her husband's fame wouldn't interfere with the potential success of her new business. Of course, all those assumptions had been wrong. Instead of having a few people to greet, she found herself standing in front of a crowd of photographers, waiting for everyone to gather so she could cut the red ribbon in front of the 2 glass doors. The flashing of the cameras blinded her and made her feel a bit anxious and insecure. With all the pictures being taken, she started wondering if she had indeed made the right choice when it came to the decorations. From the corner of her eye, she could see Ryan talking to Peter. They seemed to be discussing something pretty important. But what? Had it not been for her mother who was holding her, Kayla doubted she would have been able to stand on her legs. Ryan joined them. Okay, dear. I guess everyone we invited is here. I think it's time we get this over with. Ryan glanced at the crowd as he whispered those things to her, his blue eyes gazing through the crowd of familiar faces. Ryan, I can't do this. There was no way she could give a speech in front of all those people. It was crazy. There were people Ryan had worked with, people who were used to his selected words and careful phrases. They would expect the same thing from her, and there was no possible way she could ever reach those expectations. Sure you can. You don't even have to stick to what we wrote last night. Just say whatever you deem fit. He whispered in her ear, his breath fanning her neck, making a trail of goosebumps to raise on the back of her neck. She wished she could run away and hide under her covers, because that was exactly what her body and mind urged her to do. But she couldn't. She had an obligation to fulfill. She had signed up for that on her own, and now she needed to find a way to bring it to an end. "Hello," she began. Her voice was shaky and a bit low. In fact, it had been so low she doubted they even heard her. But low as it had been, it gathered all attention, making all eyes to set on her. Slowly, she moved away from her mother and Ryan, praying to dear God that she wouldn't fall and make a fool of herself in front of all those people. She tried remembering the words she had dotted down the night before, or at least the ideas she had touched upon, but she couldn't remember. Her mind had blanked out. But she had a plan B. Ryan had given it to her moments ago. All she needed to do was talk about what she felt. "Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming here today. A few years ago, as most of you might know, I was a no one, a mere waitress who was kicked out of work because I did not have the power to talk to a customer. When that happened, I went back home and swore to myself that one day I would be someone who would fight hard and prove to all those people that they weren't any more special than I was. Of course, at that time, it was all but a dream. I had no idea how I was going to become the woman I so badly wanted to be. But life never fails us. It never leaves us alone to tend to our own problems and hopes. It is always there. It sends us help. It sends us advice. All we need to do is listen. Well, life sent me Ryan and his mother. They showed me the light at the end of the tunnel. His mother, Meredith, trusted me, and he loved me. And thanks to those two things, I came to be who I am today. They gave me back my mother and a beautiful daughter. And thanks to them, I gained the most powerful weapon, a weapon that can help me fulfill whatever dream I have. A family. To keep things short, I want to thank them, and my mother for supporting me, for giving me everything I ever needed or wished for. For that, I will be forever grateful. Setting formalities aside, thank you for coming, and I hope this makes your day a bit sweeter. She grabbed the scissors from Ryan's hands and cut the ribbon. The gesture made the crowd erupt in a fit of applause, all directed towards her. She couldn't believe she had actually done it. She had officially opened her own bakery. Inside, people had already started eating, serving themselves with the sweets scattered on the tables. Peter was around them, walking by the guests, making sure to make small talk to each one of them, telling them a story or two about who taught him the recipes for that specific plate. He was good at small talk, he was charming and witty, able to immediately spot what a person wanted. Kayla was still under the effect of the adrenaline from back the opening. She walked through the crowd with Ryan in hand. She smiled and spoke, but could never actually remember who she saw or what she said. It had all been so surreal, so out of a story, but she loved every part of it. Chapter 10. Saying she was nervous would have been an understatement. She was frightened. Her heart was beating fast, her pulse reaching impossible scales. Her entire body trembled as she held onto Ryan's arm for support. She felt cold and hot all at the same time, not to mention the beads of sweat resting on the skin of her palms and forehead. She could hear chatter around her. The other patients seemed to be rather talkative, unlike her. She couldn't focus on a conversation, not when she knew that her fate was going to be written in just a couple of minutes. She knew that it was now or never. Her destiny was bound to be sealed by the results that had already come in. All that was left was for her to discover what was in store for her. Ryan seemed to understand her desire for silence. He hadn't said a word ever since he came to pick her up from the bakery. His leg kept shaking, probably unconsciously, while his teeth kept nibbling at the nails of his left hand. Ryan was never one to be nervous. He always kept his cool face on, never once losing his posture. But that day was an exception. You could tell he was worried from miles away. And he had every right to be. Kayla? She had been so lost in her own thoughts that she almost missed her name being called. The voice of the nurse was a mere echo in the back of her head, a noise like all the others. Kayla's head moved from side to side as if she finally realized where she was. She immediately jumped to her feet and took in a deep breath, looking at Ryan, who was by her side almost instantly. He sent her half a smile, trying to encourage her. "Yeah, you can go in now," the blonde nurse said. The walk from the waiting area to the doctor's office seemed like an entire year. The few steps they both took towards that room at the end of the hallway was like walking on broken glass. It was like walking towards their own execution. True, they had hope. They had also prepared for what was worst case. But no amount of preparation was enough. They had been living the life for the last couple of months, and they were so scared that the result would shatter it all. What the doctor had to say would just knock the hope and faith both their hearts had found. "Everything is going to be okay?" Kayla wished she could listen to him. Instead, she felt like crying. She wished she could just refuse to go in, that she could just send Ryan inside. But that was a battle she needed to fight on her own. She needed to be there. Kayla bit her lip and walked in after Ryan. Her steps were small and undetermined. As soon as she stepped inside, her nostrils were hit with the smell of medicine and other chemicals, the familiar smell of hospital. She always hated that smell. Her entire body seemed to reject the scent. It made her shudder and wrinkle her nose. As soon as they entered, the doctor stood up and greeted them. He looked bored and tired, probably exhausted after a long day at work. His white coat was wrinkled too, the proof of the hours spent behind his desk. "How are we feeling today?" he asked as he slipped his glasses on, the blue frames resting on the bridge of his nose. "Good," Kayla exhaled, a voice hoarse and barely audible. "So, I see we are pretty nervous today. I guess we should just go straight to the point, shall we?" "That would be great, doctor." Ryan nervously chuckled. "So, while I look at the results of your previous MRI, could you tell me how you have been feeling lately? Have the symptoms intensified?" "Not really. I've been a bit dizzy from time to time, but that could also be because I have been working more. I haven't had that many headaches either, but my eyes have been bothering me a bit." "It's normal. The tumor must be pressing on the nerves. But we will get to that soon. I studied your results, and it seems that the tumor didn't grow as big as we initially expected it to. It is still in a place where we cannot enter surgically, but—" He turned towards them, taking in a deep breath, as he glanced one more time at the screen reflecting the pictures of Kayla. "Given that you are pregnant in your 4th month, and that the tumor did not advance, I believe it would be safe for you to begin treatment." That had been it, the news Kayla had been waiting for. Suddenly she could breathe again. It had been as if a weight had been lifted from her chest. She hadn't been breathing for the last couple of months, and she had just realized that. She felt like climbing on the roof of a building and screaming. She felt like telling the entire world that she was going to make it. This time she truly believed it, with her entire body and mind. "You mean we can actually start the treatment?" Unlike her, Ryan seemed to find it hard to believe it. "Yes, that is exactly what I am saying." That is when all formalities were forgotten. Ryan jumped from his seat and grabbed Kayla by her arms, wrapping her in his. He was so happy, so utterly and insanely happy. His wife was going to be okay. The mother of his children was going to be okay. Everything was going to be okay. They all laughed, tears blurring their vision. The rest of the time was spent talking about the procedure. The doctor filled them in about the protocol and everything that needed to be done beforehand. Kayla listened carefully, her entire brain focusing on the words the man said. Minutes later, Kayla and Ryan walked out of the office hand in hand. Their previous serious looks were long gone, replaced by smiles and a trail of happy tears. The people going out of the office did not resemble the ones who went in. These people were glowing. They were hoping. They bid everyone in the waiting room goodbye as they headed towards the elevators. The double doors of the elevator opened sooner than they expected, revealing the empty, spacious room inside. On their way up, Kayla hadn't noticed the murmuring, but now she did. She felt, saw, and heard things she had previously ignored. And it was all because she now appreciated life and her second chance at it. Just as he was about to press the ground floor button, Kayla's hand stopped him. Her fingers wrapped around his, making him stop midway. She did not wait for him to react. Her fingers pressed the last floor button before he got to. "What are you doing?" He frowned, looking at her from the corner of his eyes. "You'll see." Kayla grabbed Ryan by the arm, pulling him behind her. There weren't many people on the hallways on that floor, but they still had to walk past some nurses holding trays of needles and cotton balls. Finally, they reached the door of the stairs leading to the rooftop. Ryan was confused but said nothing. He was curious as to what his wife had in mind. She wasn't one to usually do crazy stuff. She was often one to follow the rules and stick to the safe side, but it seemed that those principles had flown out the window. She pushed the door of the fire escape open, her feet stepping onto the staircase almost immediately. "What in the world are we doing on the roof?" "Just shut up, Ryan. Look around." Kayla had one reason to go on that rooftop. She wanted to celebrate, to free her body from all the energy that had piled up into her soul and mind those past few weeks. She needed to feel the breeze on her skin and to forget about everyone and everything for a second. She needed to let go. The view around her proved that there was no better place to do that than on a rooftop. And given that the hospital was the closest thing at hand, that was the best place. Ryan did as his wife commanded. He gazed around and immediately understood her. You could see the entire city from up there, the twinkling lights of the dying sun glistening over the dusty windows of the skyscrapers. The busy traffic was one of the main sights. The honking sound of the cars could be heard too, slipping between the cars and passing people. Up there, with the breeze pressing against their skin and their eyes gazing over the entire city, it felt like they were living above all the rules and principles society placed. It was like they were living in a world parallel to all others, a world of their own. None of them saw it coming, not even Kayla, but she suddenly screamed. She had been meaning to do that since the doctor mentioned her therapy. She now felt relieved, freed of her worries. Ryan chuckled form beside her, the sound turning into fits of laughter. "Go ahead, your turn." She motioned towards him. "Me?" He pointed towards himself, his brows raising. "You want me to scream?" Kayla did not hesitate. She nodded as if she was asking the simplest of things. Ryan tried to figure out if she was joking or not. He looked into her eyes for a couple of seconds before he realized she was actually serious. "Well?" Ryan shook his head but did not reject her. He curled his hands into tight fists before he let it all go. All it took was one single loud sound to make his entire body relax. "I have to admit, we must make this a tradition." Kayla laughed and shook her head. Her hands reached for Ryan and grabbed him. She pulled him closer and kissed him. She kissed him as if it was her first and last time kissing him. She allowed all her love for him to pour into that one single gesture. "I love you," he whispered as he slowly pulled back, his forehead resting onto hers. "Never forget that." The bakery had closed a few minutes ago, right after the last customer had left, but no one had returned home. Not yet. They were all waiting for Ryan and Kayla to return. No one spoke a thing. Nothing could be heard in the entire place, except the sound of Emily, who was cheerfully playing in the corner. Meredith was worried, but no one could truly understand what was going on in Tanya's heart. Every moment waiting for her daughter was like going through hell. She didn't know what was going on, if the news was good or bad, or if they had any news at all. Being oblivious to what was going on was the worst thing ever. She just wished they would come or call already, otherwise she was sure to die before she got to find out. "Okay, that's it. I am going." Tanya stood up dramatically, slamming her hands against the table. Her gestures were fast. She grabbed her purse and turned around before she even got to finish the sentence. "And where exactly are you going, Mom?" Kayla and Ryan walked into the bakery hand in hand. They were all smiles, unable to hide the happiness within. Kayla raised an eyebrow at her mom, trying hard not to look amused. "You! Why didn't you call us?" Tanya had been so worried she did not even notice she was crying. Tears were simply pouring down her cheeks. She was frustrated, mad, and sad, but also happy to see Kayla. "Well?" Kayla took a short pause to look at everyone. "It was mostly because we wanted to give you the good news in person. I start chemotherapy on Monday." The news followed no moment of silence. All three grown-ups sitting around the table screamed, their hands flying in the air. Everyone came to hug her one by one, their lips muttering things she stopped understanding at a certain point. Everyone talked, wished her well, and congratulated her on the good news. They were all talking in chorus to Kayla and Ryan. Emily had joined them too, jumping into her dad's arms, washing him with kisses. She had no idea what was going on, but neither did she ask, much to her parents' delight. She didn't need to know. The matter was soon going to be behind them anyway. "This news calls for a party," Peter finally announced. His hand was already holding on to the remote control, turning on the speakers behind the counter. Kayla couldn't remember what songs played that night, but they had all been full of life and rhythm. She danced by Ryan, holding on to Emily's hand, laughing and smiling as she chaotically moved her hips. Her moves certainly did not match the rhythm of the songs, although she believed herself to be a good dancer. She was too happy and too full of energy to even focus on the rhythm of the song. Instead, she allowed herself to be as free as a kid. Her body moved without her accord and her lips smiled. "I told you everything would work out," her mother whispered to her, just as her arms wrapped around her. It was true, she had told her, and she had been right. Kayla held her mother close to her chest, allowing her body to feel her warmth. It was true, she had Ryan as her main support now, but she could never do anything without her mom. She and her mom were a duo that would simply lose direction if one of the two pieces got lost. "I am proud of you, Kayla, and I am sure you father would have been just as proud. No one ever realized it, but hearing such a thing always made her day." To her, having her father's approval was everything. Whenever she made a decision or chose to do things a certain way, she would always think of him and how he would have reacted. Hearing that he would have approved of who she had become meant she had done something right in her life. It meant that she had indeed lived out her life the way she wanted and should have lived it. And that, in itself, along with the people surrounding her, was pure happiness to her. Chapter 11. Inside the blankets it was warm, but she still felt cold. She snuggled into Ryan, her cold nose pressing against his side trying to get warmth. She wished she could keep the wig on at night too. It kept her head far warmer than the scarf she wore to bed, but unfortunately, she couldn't. She could feel Ryan's hand brushing patterns against her palm, tracing unknown symbols that crossed his mind. Kayla could not remember the last time they had been able to spend a morning together. They had been so busy these past few months with the therapy, the bakery, and his work. They had been trying their best to balance things, and had been succeeding to a certain degree. Thankfully, Christmas Eve meant they got to have a free day. "Good morning," she muttered as she snuggled closer to him. She allowed his scent to engulf her. Well, someone woke up oddly early. Truth be told, she was surprised too. She was the kind of person who could sleep until noon if given the opportunity. In fact, Ryan never failed to lose a chance to tease her about it. "I had to. I promised Emily I'll take her down to the park today." When did that happen? Ryan had been with them the entire day, but he couldn't remember it happening. He was more than sure he would have volunteered to take them had he been witness to such a promise. "Well," she began, as she lifted her head to look at him. "It was yesterday while I was reading her a story. I swear I will never understand where she gets her energy from." She groaned and sank into the pillows once again. Ryan chuckled but moved to hover over her, his body trapping hers between the mattress and himself. There wasn't much space between them. They were so close he could feel her heartbeat through the thin material of her shirt. Slowly he leaned in to kiss her. Their lip touch was gentle, soft, and delicate, like that of a rose. But it had the strength to make her shudder with lust. "I'll come along then. Make sure she doesn't kill you with energy," he muttered against her lips. She could feel his mouth curve against her as he smirked, her hands moving to grab him by the shoulder and pull him closer once again. God knows where that kiss would have led had she not ruined it. Suddenly, she felt weak and nauseous. Her stomach churned as bile rose to her mouth. With one swift move, she pushed him off of her and ran to the bathroom. She hovered over the toilet, the foul smell of her vomit making her dizzy. She had been experiencing this for over 5 months now, but she still couldn't get used to it. She could sense Ryan at the door, waiting for her to finish. When she did, she collapsed to the floor, her back resting against the bathtub. "I'm sorry." She hated what was happening to her. She hated how her disease had turned her into this person she hated so much. She no longer felt like Kayla, the energetic African-American woman who loved life. She was always weak and dizzy, vomiting in the most unexpected of times. Nor did she look like herself anymore. Her hair was gone, her nails were chipped, and her skin was dry. She looked like the wreck of a woman she once knew. For what? Ryan was by her side now, his arms getting hold of her, but she pushed him away. She didn't want him so close, not when she was in such a state. "You did not sign up for this when you married me. Look what I've become. I am not beautiful anymore. How could I be when the treatment has turned me into this?" They had never had this conversation before. She never had the courage to confess to anyone how she felt about the entire thing. "What? Hell no, Kayla. You are my wife. Remember our vows? In sickness and in health. I did not say that just because I had to. I meant them. I love you the way you are. You are beautiful the way you are. It's not the hair that makes you beautiful or anything else. It is your eyes, your soul, your heart, and every other inch of you. The treatment is going to make you better, and that's what's important, nothing else." It was wonderful how that morning turned from a sweet cuddle into an emotional one. But truthfully, she needed that. She needed to get that out of her heart and mind. She had been silently thinking about that ever since she lost her hair. She had tried to get used to it, to face the fact that hair wasn't what made her who she was. And it hadn't been the loss of hair that broke her, that had just been the starter point. "Come on, go wash your face. We have to go get breakfast for our little nugget over there." He motioned for her baby bump. Kayla brushed her tears with the back of her hand and nodded. She had to admit she was hungry. Her baby boy seemed to have quite an appetite. She had gained over 20 pounds with the baby, but she was fine with it. All that mattered was that he came out of all of this healthy and happy. "Can we have eggs and cheese for breakfast? I swear I've been craving that in my sleep." Ryan chuckled and shook his head. Food would always cheer his wife up. "Sure, I'll prepare them myself. I'll wait downstairs for you." "Well, little baby, I guess it's just you and me again." She sighed as she stood up, her hands already reaching for the tap of the shower. Kayla did not take too long to shower. She was not in the mood to stand under boiling hot water too much. She was also too scared that the hot water vapor would make her dizzier than she was. So, after showering, she threw on a pair of jeans and a large yellow sweater and descended downstairs. She could smell the scrambled eggs from the top of the stairs. The smell of eggs mixing with the coffee was absolutely breathtaking to her. She could feel her baby kicking, clearly as excited as she was. He had been rather energetic those past few days. Kayla knew the time was near. She was going to give birth any day now, and the mobility of the kid would only intensify. "Mom!" Emily greeted. She must have been in the living room and was half running, half dancing her way to the kitchen. "Good morning, darling. How did you sleep?" She kissed her on the top of her head. The sweet smell of strawberry and honey filled her nostrils. "Good. Come on, let's go get breakfast. I think Daddy cooked." She grabbed onto Emily's hand, walking by her towards the kitchen. Christmas carols played in the background, just like every year. Meredith and her mom were a big fan of the holiday season, and they never lost a single day to celebrate it. The decorations were up too. They had decorated the last room 2 days before. The theme that year was golden red, much to Tanya's delight. The tree was, however, the jewel of the entire house. It filled the living room with light and good vibes. It was filled with memories from their years together. The star was never changed. It was the last star Kayla's dad had placed on the tree. And Ryan had agreed she could continue the tradition and use it there as well. It was her home too, after all. "Good morning, darling, how are you?" She wasn't as fine as she hoped she would be. But she was done with drama for a day. She needed to listen to Ryan and understand that everything would be over soon. All she had to do was smile and go through it all. "I am great. It was so good to finally be able to sleep in." "Where is Mom?" "She went to see some friend. Said she will be back by lunch." "Well, I don't think we will be here by lunch. We promised Emily will take her to the park." "You are coming with us?" Emily asked Ryan, her large blue eyes looking at her father from beneath her lashes. "Of course. Wouldn't miss playing with you in the snow. By the way, I've been thinking, what if this year we don't organize our annual Christmas banquet? I really think we need some quality time as a family. Wouldn't you agree?" Hearing Meredith suggest that was beyond bizarre. She was never one to miss a party. She was one to go for the extravagant things, to push for more. "We would love that," Kayla gushed. "In fact, what if we spend it back at our cottage? The view there is magnificent at this time of the year." Kayla could already see it all. The lights, the candles, the snow, and carols. She had it all planned. All she needed was Meredith's approval. "Well, I guess we have our Christmas plans." Usually, Kayla didn't mind the cold much. She enjoyed a bit of chill. It reminded her of the holidays that were mere days away. But lately, she hadn't been friends with it. Some said it was because of the treatment. Others said it was because of the pregnancy. Well, whatever the reason, she still didn't like it one bit. She shivered as she took one more step through the snow, trying to keep up with Emily's hurried step. "Do you want my jacket?" Ryan asked from beside her. He seemed to have noticed her discomfort. But there was really no need for that. She was going to survive it. It wasn't like she was dying of hypothermia. "I'm fine." She smiled. "Hey, Em, do you want to build a snowman?" The previous year, they didn't have the pleasure of having a lot of snow, especially during Christmas. But thankfully, that year, the weather had been promising a white holiday season. "Yes! Okay, so first we should—" Kayla began her instructions. The first person to ever teach her how to make a snowman had been her father. She had been around Emily's age when she finally properly learned how to do so. She remembered each and every word her dad had used, and she quoted them all to her daughter. Through small gestures such as those, Kayla allowed the memory of her father to live. It was like he was carrying his legacy without even thinking about it. She imagined that one day her daughter would teach her own children, and who knows, maybe she would remember her the same way Kayla remembered her father. "There, see, we got the base. Now we have to repeat the same steps and create a body." Emily giggled and went straight to work. She was having a bit of a hard time rolling the snowball through the snow, but she was getting a hold of that. Kayla was just about to cheer her daughter on when something cold hit her shoulder. Immediately, she turned around to catch Ryan laughing. He seemed to be enjoying her mad and confused look more than he should have. "This is war!" Her voice was low, threatening, her eyes squinting, looking him straight in the eyes. Without much thinking, she reached for the ground and created a ball in her left fist, immediately launching it towards Ryan. Through her lashes, she saw Ryan prepare for another blow, a fact that made her squeal and run. As she hid behind a tree, she threw more snow at him. Emily had joined their little battle too, taking her father's side. The moment she tried running to another hiding spot, Ryan caught her, wrapping his arms around her, causing them to both lose balance and fall into the cold snow. Kayla was laughing so hard her side hurt while her cheeks ached. She couldn't remember the last time she had had so much fun. "Well, I was cold, and you guys just made it worse." Kayla laughed as she stood up trying to get the snow off of her. "How about we head home? We can cuddle and have some hot chocolate." "Can I watch TV in your room?" Emily looked at them with large eyes. "Yes, Em, you get to—" A sudden vibration through her lower half made Kayla stop. She felt her lower muscles contracting for a few seconds before letting go. Guys. She looked at Ryan with wide eyes, the sudden feeling of wetness between her legs making her panic. Change of plans. I think it's time. Time? Ryan had no idea what was going on. Foolish as that may sound, it didn't cross his mind that his wife was going into labor. Right there, in the middle of the park. The baby is coming, you fool. Whenever Kayla remembered that day, she always mentioned Ryan's face, the way his jaw fell the moment he heard her. He ran in circles for a few seconds, unsure of what direction to take. Kayla and Emily stood by his side, trying hard not to laugh. He was holding onto his hair the moment he stopped, his face clearly asking for guidance. Men, Kayla thought. He was acting as if she was going to give birth there and then. At a certain point, she was afraid he would ask for towels and hot water. Ryan, breathe. We go that way. That way, right. Chapter 12. If there is one thing about pregnancies, it is that they prepare you for everything, except the moment of delivery. You read books, articles, and attend classes. You listen to advice and whatever else. You acquire knowledge of how the baby should be fed or changed. But none of those ever include the vivid description of how painful the delivery is. Funny thing is that even if you had a baby, you still manage to forget how intense that pain is. You remember it faintly, a simple ghost among many others. Kayla remembered the agony she had gone through with Emily's birth, only after she found herself gasping for air and pushing. But even then, it was too late. She strongly believed that it was a defense mechanism the body created to prevent young mothers from being too scared. She had no other definition for that. Despite all that, one thing was for sure. She was giving birth, and she needed to find out a way through which she could manage to get out of it. She hadn't been in labor for long, but those few minutes seemed to go on and on. Unlike the time before, Ryan wasn't with her yet. He was waiting with Emily outside, hoping that their mothers would show up already. He needed to be by his wife's side, and he needed to do so ASAP. Kayla, I want you to breathe. Your contractions are really close now. Your baby will be out any moment now. You just need to concentrate. She tried following the doctor's instructions. She tried taking in steady breaths, one after the other, supplying her tensing muscles with oxygen. Just when she least expected it, another contraction came her way. She screamed, her lips parting almost immediately. She meant to arch her back, a thing that was highly not indicated, but just as she was about to do so, she felt someone's hand onto hers. Her body recognized Ryan's presence before her mind did, relaxing a bit as he touched her. It's okay, I am here now. Ryan! She hissed as she pushed. That one time, her body reacted to the contraction differently. She felt every muscle inside her contract, not just her lower half. Her scream echoed through the room. Just as her body slammed onto the bed once again, she heard it. The little cry that followed the silence after her scream. The voice was the cutest thing she had ever heard. Her entire body shivered. Tears welled in her eyes as she saw him, the baby inside the doctor's arms. He was still covered in blood, his small body wrinkled and a bit blue. But he was still beautiful. Congratulations, it's a healthy and beautiful boy. Kayla cried, her lower lip trembling as she extended her arms towards the doctor. Hello, Brian, she whispered. Her finger caressed his cheek, feeling the softness of his skin beneath her fingertip. She could swear she saw her little baby smiling at the small touch, but the expression was gone before she could make sure. Well, hello there, little one. You have given us quite a fright back at the park. Ryan chuckled. He was trying to look strong, but he didn't succeed. Even a blind person could see the tears of happiness in his eyes. His hand trembled as he cupped his son's head. Ryan might have been a strong and feared businessman, but he was a loving and emotional husband and dad. He had the purest and most tender heart Kayla ever came to meet, and it was the heart she loved most in that entire world. Slowly, her son opened his eyes, but only for a few seconds. That moment had been magical. It had been the first time they ever gazed into one another's eyes, the first time Kayla and Ryan had the privilege to see those two hazel orbs behind the closed eyelids. He has your eyes, Ryan whispered, kissing her forehead. She nodded as she cried. She was sobbing now. It was bad to cry this much, but she couldn't contain herself. She had been through so much the last couple of months. She had gone from being sick without a hope of treatment to being sick because of the treatment. But in the end, every bad thing led her to where she was then. Right there, holding her baby. Each and every bad day had vanished. She was finally happy. She understood that God had a plan for her. All she had to do was accept the darkness and search for a way to lighten the way. "You should go tell our moms I gave birth. They must be freaking out," she whispered. She did not want Ryan to leave, not even a bit. But they still had their duties. "Don't come back. She will be sent to her room soon enough," her doctor mentioned as she returned to her seat, probably preparing to clean up the place before letting her go. And in fact, that had been exactly the case. An hour later, Kayla was back in her hospital room, surrounded by flowers and balloons. The sun had settled long ago, leaving the light bulb as the only source of light inside. Meredith was currently holding Brian, showing his little hands to Emily, who was ecstatic. She had tried persuading her into letting her hold him, but Kayla had been too scared. She allowed her, however, to sit in bed by him and shower him with kisses and love, the way a bigger sister should. Tanya, on the other hand, was tending to her own daughter, helping her clean up a bit. She had brought a pair of pajamas and one of the silk scarves Kayla wore to bed. They had all been in the bag they had prepared a month ago. When they had packed that bag, everyone thought they would leave for the hospital from home, the bakery in the worst-case scenario. None of them, however, would ever dream that her water would break in the middle of the park. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door that made them all turn. A red-headed nurse walked in, her smile reaching her ears as she greeted them all. She seemed young, definitely not older than 25. She must have been either in her last year of studies or just graduated. "I came to take the baby. I am sure the mother could use some rest anyway." The nurse was right about one thing. Kayla was exhausted. The delivery had drained her from every bit of energy her body had, leaving her cold and empty. All she wished for was some sleep so that she could wake up fresh and full of energy, ready to enjoy her new little bundle of joy. "Where is she taking him?" Emily asked, as she rubbed her eyes with the back of her hand. She seemed as tired as her mother. Her eyes were red and puffy. "Well, the doctors need to take care of him for a bit. Meanwhile, why don't you head home with Grandma? You are tired and in great need of rest." Ryan picked her up and pinned her against his side, kissing her nose as he waited for an answer. "But, no buts. We will be back home in the morning. You won't even notice we are gone." She looked at her mother, hoping to be backed up, but sighed when Kayla shook her head. Emily was just like her mother. She hated to be bossed around. The only problem was she was 5, and that was kind of the thing that happened 90% of the time. "Come on, come give your mom a kiss before you go." Kayla tried not to wince as she moved towards the edge of the bed. The pain in her body made it really hard for her to make any kind of movement. "Well, we did it again. We brought another wonderful soul into the world," Ryan finally said when they were left alone. He came to sit by her side, his arms wrapping her in his arms. "We are kind of good at that, aren't we?" She chuckled, her head resting on his chest, her eyes closing involuntary. She tried really hard not to fall asleep immediately. She wished to spend a bit more time with him, to talk about the little angel she had given birth to. But unfortunately, darkness took over faster than expected, and the last thing she knew was him saying, "It's because I love you." "One more, guys. We need to take a perfect one. I have to frame a picture with little Brian," Meredith muttered as she closed one eye, ready to take yet another shot of the family sitting on the couch right next to the Christmas tree. That had already been the 10th picture, but none of them dared say anything. "Say cheese!" They all smiled at the same time, except the baby, who seemed to get more irritated by the second. Emily, on the other hand, loved taking photos. She could stay there the entire day without complaining. "Grandma, can you take a picture of me by the fireplace?" Kayla shook her head and couldn't help but think how much her little daughter resembled her grandma. It was almost as if they had Meredith's little copy from the past. "You know, If she turns out to be anything like my mom, we will have some serious trouble, Ryan whispered in her ear, making her chuckle. If? She is already a living replica of your mom, she argued back, careful to keep her voice down so they wouldn't be busted. Heard that? And there went her hope of keeping their conversation a secret. Kayla and Ryan burst into fits of laughter so loud that they seemed to have scared Brian. The little boy moved in his mother's arms, kicking with his arms and legs. He was tired. She was more than sure about that. He wasn't used to the cottage, and the foreign atmosphere must have set him on edge. Not that he was a quiet baby at home. Why don't you go put him to sleep, darling? Ryan and I will set the table while you are gone. It was her mother who spoke this time around. She walked past them with a bottle of wine in hand, heading towards the small table by the window. Go ahead, your mom and I got this. The house wasn't as big as the mansion. It took her seconds to walk from one room to another instead of full minutes. She even had to close the door to keep out the noise of the Christmas carols they had been playing from entering the room. Come here, little one. Kayla held him close to her chest as she started humming, hoping that the sound of her voice would soothe the little boy's temper. She hoped she could nurse him too, but the therapy stopped her lactation from day one. She had been sad at first, cursed her fate for taking away her satisfaction of being a mother too. But she figured it was for the best anyway. She wasn't sure how good her milk would have been. Thankfully, her presence and the song she had been singing had been more than enough to put the little one to sleep. He was still so small and fragile, a mere bean in her hand. She had forgotten how small babies were in their first couple of weeks. In fact, it had been a few days since she had delivered, but she was still scared whenever she held him. Slowly, she sat him in his crib, careful not to jingle the little toy she had on top of it. Her lips kissed his hand before she placed it beneath the fluffy blue blanket inside. A gentle knock on the door brought her back to reality, making her turn and gaze towards it. Love, dinner is ready. Kayla nodded and motioned for him to be quiet. I am coming, she hushed. The smell was divine. The roasted chicken, the mashed potatoes, and marinated wings, the bread and everything else on there was simply and completely mouth-watering, not to mention the sweets waiting for them at the end of the dinner. Everyone was seated around the table by the time she had arrived, chatting with Emily, who seemed to be even more alive than usual. Thank God you are here. I was starving, Tanya confessed, her hand reaching for the fork she had to her left. In fact, I would like it if you could wait a couple more minutes. Ryan and I have an announcement. For the first time, she wasn't afraid or anxious about an announcement. She had gotten so used to them that she had become immune. Everyone frowned as they looked at her, their hearts stopping for a second. Please tell me you aren't having another baby. It was Emily who spoke. Her words were so much bigger than her. She had been so serious that everyone around the table burst into a fit of laughter, their voices echoing through the house. No, darling, we aren't. Anyway, we talked to my doctor right after Brian was born. We did a couple of tests and, well, I am having my last chemo on Friday. Kayla was overwhelmed. It had been so hard to keep the good news a secret, but she had wanted to share it on a special day. She was cured. She and Ryan had survived yet another obstacle. It had been a long journey, but looking back at it, she couldn't believe she even doubted it for a second. Their love and trust in one another was strong, stronger than any disease, human or supernatural power. And that was the key to the happy life they were always meant to live. The end.